Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello Gamer Nation and welcome to the Gospel Podcast, covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play in the Genesis role-playing game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host, GM Hooly, and this episode we'll be discussing something I use probably in every single gaming session I run. But before we get into that, I'd like to introduce you to my singular fellow bearded co-host and friend, GM Huzz. Happy holidays. How's it going?
Good. It's a shame about Martin and Caitlin, though.
I know.
I had to cut the heads off. There can only be one.
Because he's doing Christmassy things, and Caitlin's
also doing Christmassy things.
Also, yeah, she's travelling. I think last episode she mentioned it, that she's going to somewhere where there's lots of snow.
She just finished a 24-hour straight drive across
oh my God.
America. So,
wow, that's insane. Now, we might be without GMs Flano and Caitlin, but don't despair, good listeners, for we called out around the world ready for a brand new beat. Summer's here, in Australia at least, and the time is right to welcome back two fan favourites of the Gospel Podcast, GM Mick, who is live with us here in the studio, and coming from Texas, the United States, GM Chris from the Order 66 Podcast. Welcome back to both of you to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good. It's good to be back, actually. Thank you.
Chris, how are you going?
Yeah, how's it going? What's up, Gamer Nation? GM Chris here, and I'm happy to be back. I'm back in time. I'm in the past.
Because it's Sunday here for us and Saturday there for you.
Yes, it is.
There you go. So, yes, unfortunately, Trump's still president. But that's okay.
politically charged, just like that.
Yeah.
Wow, see, just go straight in for it. Anyway, so what's everybody been up to? Mick, what sort of gaming... Sorry, we're going to have confusion.
We're going to have confusion again.
Right,
yes.
So it's going to be GM Mick and GM Huzz. So Huzz, what sort of gaming have you been up to?
Gaming, tabletop-wise, basically nil.
Oh, is that my fault?
It is.
Right, excellent.
But I've been doing a lot of PC gaming and developing. MechWarrior Online has been consuming my life lately.
Right.
Thanks to Martin, because he is a monster. But that's okay. And I've been foolishly spending real money on it.
Oh.
Because, I like shiny mechs and they cost not that much. And I throw my wallet at the screen.
Wow.
But it's okay. Because I'm saving money by not buying stuff for other tabletop games. So that's how I justify it. I would pay $15 for one mech model.
Right.
So I'm paying $15 for a digital mech model. So it's exactly the same.
Right.
So it all works out well. But no, seriously, I've been doing not much of anything tabletop wise. It's been a bit of a drought.
Wow.
Which has been hurting me, but
well, we'll change that later on this evening when we play Star Wars that we haven't played for about a month. So
yeah. However, me and Martin were looking at the new Vampire Masquerade rulebook and developing, bouncing ideas around for some characters and possibly starting a game with that. We don't know.
Cool.
But, we talk about these things a lot. If it happens, that's a different thing. But, it's if you haven't looked at the new Vampire Masquerade book,
yep,
definitely worth picking up or even flipping through. It's a very nicely laid out book. It's definitely one of the nicest ones out there, I think.
It is beautiful looking. I think that, look, I'm going to go out there and say that FFG has certainly laid down the law as far as how good books are supposed to look. And I think other companies are falling into line with that. It may not be FFG.
Well, we're being FFG fanboys, we have to say that. We're obligated to. So
it's in our contract.
If we don't, they come after us. Sam Stewart, he's serious.
The check's in the mail, boy.
Well, if you flip your Genesis book over and there's the artwork inspired by Sam Stewart with the dude carrying the rifle, that's actually Sam Stewart hunting you down. If you don't praise FFG every 2 seconds.
Sam, if you're listening, I'm really sorry.
I'm living in constant fear. There's a reason why Martin and Caitlin aren't here. They're terrified. And possibly in Sam Stewart's trunk.
They've actually got into hiding. Or They're dead. Either way.
You see, if on my show, if we don't like fanboy out over FFG, then Sam Stewart flies over to my house in a starship and then pulls out a lightsaber and cuts me open and then makes a witty quip about how it smelled worse on the outside.
And he sticks one of his friends inside the cut open wound to keep him warm.
Oh, so warm.
No, it's not Thursday. No.
Oh no, dear me. All right, Mick. What's it
Sam,
again?
if you are listening, I'm so sorry.
Sam, if you're listening, I'm really sorry that I'm here.
Sam, if you're listening, it was all GM Mick's idea to talk about this.
Right. Yes. So Mick, what sort of gaming have you been up to?
Bit like GM Huzz, actually. I haven't done a great deal. Most recently, very, very busy period at work. That's with a bit of interstate travel and lots of stuff happening in my home office, so that's kept me very busy. And to throw into the mix, also been thrust into the unpleasant task of moving house.
Oh.
So I think most of my gaming's involved taking the gaming stuff that I own off shelves and packing them into boxes.
It's the worst, isn't it?
Oh, it's terrible.
And you'll never find it again. Well, you'll find it, but it'll be like years later. And you'll go, I remember that.
I'm actually meticulously labelling many of the boxes with what's in there because we're doing a house sit arrangement for a few months and I know that I'll go absolutely insane if I don't have access to some of my hobby stuff.
Right.
So I've got to try
But you're missing your opportunity. This is the chance to clean out your game collection of all the stuff you don't play anymore, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Who does that,
Yeah.
Chris?
I actually have done that to a small degree, but in the time frame we've got, what I can actually achieve is quite limited. But there's a lot of, but most of it's books. Once I have a book, it becomes a part of me. It's really hard to actually part with it, even if I don't necessarily use it or play it. I often, it just has nostalgic value, I guess. Like it sits on the shelf, and I think about all the experiences I've had with them, so it's hard to part.
Well, when I last moved, I had a big pile of books. I went, you know what? I haven't read these for about 5 years. They're going. And I gave them all away, and I still, in my net result, I still had a lot of books. Didn't feel like I achieved anything. I gave away boxes of books, and then I'm looking around like, why do I have so many books still?
Yeah.
Hey, if you want any 4th edition D&D books, just give me your address and pay for shipping, and I'll send you all I got, man.
Wow. I mean, I've got a whole heap of D&D books, but I've got rid of a whole heap recently. I've still got all my Pathfinder stuff, but
I'm not getting rid of my 3rd edition or my Pathfinder or my 5th ed, but you can have my 4th. That's fine.
Yeah. So what are we doing? Gaming. I guess the last game I did was some L5R.
God, that
was a while ago now.
It was a while ago. Again, my fault.
I think this is it this week or next week will be possibly a month ago.
It's been more for me because I missed the last L5R.
Ah,
that's
that's
true.
right. Jeez, you must be having DTs in a big way.
Yeah, so I did some L5R. Other than that, I've done a little bit more work on my Judge Dredd setting.
Right.
Just tidying up a few little bits and pieces for myself in the few moments that I've had spare. And otherwise, in terms of gaming, it's been my son's started to begin to share my passion for Warhammer 40k. So we've been working on a couple of little projects there, building and helping him paint some miniatures. And that's been about it around life's responsibilities.
Hasn't broken any more limbs recently?
No.
He's on a good roll then.
That was the
good.
last time. Yeah, that was
broke his leg and his wrist falling out of a tree a long way.
You keep putting the 40k miniatures up there.
Yeah, well, he's trying to get him out of his reach. But no, that's all good. He's got all the cast and stuff off now, so he's pretty much fighting fit.
There you go. Very good. What about you, Chris?
Last night I had a very enjoyable and disappointing board gaming evening with family and friends. Played a game that is a Cards Against Humanity clone called What Do You Meme?
Oh yeah, it's good.
I'm just too old. But then we also played another game I've played before called Photosynthesis, which I highly recommend.
I think you mentioned that in the last time that you're on as well, and it's a great game.
We've been pulling that out about once a month. And earlier this week, I had a Skype game, Genesis, where I ran a bunch of strangers through my Aegis setting. So that was a lot of fun. They got their cosmic superhero-y goodness on, and we had a blast.
Cool. Well, as far as gaming that I've been up to, because I run everything, well, I don't run everything, but I certainly run 2 Star Wars game and an L5R game. I've been a bit slack and haven't been running it, and so disappointing everyone. But you've been
busy.
Oh, look, I've been busy with work, and I actually was really quite sick last week, all while trying to do some projects for FFG.
Yeah.
Not probably a good plan to do that, but I tell you what, the fever-induced dreams gets that creative juices running. It's great. But anyway.
Altered states of consciousness have actually created many of the great literary classics of the world. So I wouldn't be worried about that.
Right.
It's very true.
Very good. All right, so let's talk about the podcast of the week. Huzz.
Sure. This week's podcast of the week is the Movie Defenders podcast. If you are looking for reviews of films that cannot and probably should not be defended, Terminator Genesis, then this show is for you. Join Donald and Scott as they pull apart those movies you love to hate, all with a mix of humour, some foul language, and a whole heap of fun. So check out the Movie Defenders on both iTunes and your favourite podcatcher by searching at Movie Defenders. You can find this and many other outstanding podcasts at www.d20radio.com.
Indeed.
Listen, I gotta talk about the Movie Defenders, okay?
Sure.
I listen to that podcast and I scream at my car radio when I do. Like I yell at them every single episode. I yell at them and they make me so angry and I can't stop listening.
See, I deliberately not listen because I know I will get irrationally mad. So
they're entertaining, but they're so damn optimistic. And I think that's my biggest problem with it is the good intention of it all. I have a problem with the good intention. You got a group of guys that says, you know what? People focus too much on the negative and there's too much toxicity in the internet and especially around movies and everything else. So we're going to revisit things that everyone hates and talk about the great things. And you know what? That kind of optimism just pisses me off.
There's no place for it in my world.
You know? Yeah, they do a good job though. It's a good show.
Speaking of good movies,
yes,
I saw the new Spider-Man Spider-Verse movie.
Right,
fantastic.
It's
just thought I mentioned the podcast.
I have seen it, and it's absolutely fantastic. If you haven't, dear listeners, if you haven't gone out and seen it, you need to go and see it. I don't think GM Mick and Chris, you haven't seen it. No.
I would have liked to have seen it. I went to a different movie instead.
First mistake.
Which is the new Robin Hood.
That's the first movie I walked out of.
Oh,
walked out of the cinema.
Wow,
could not stand
it. It's not the first movie I walked out of.
It was definitely the second.
No, I've only ever legitimately walked out of one film.
Right,
and that was Batman Forever.
Oh, wow. That's
it was in the middle of it was when the ice skates popped out of the bat suit boots. I got up, I walked out, I demanded my money back, and they actually gave it to me.
Wow.
We like this movie is skating on thin ice.
Oh, no. That's terrible. Very good. So, Chris, what about Gamination Con? What's going on with that?
O to the M to the G. Gamer Nation Con, April 4th through 7th, 2019, Plano, Texas. D20 Radio's own little convention, the 4 Days of Gaming Goodness, man. We, in the month of November-ish, end of October, end of November, that time period, we successfully funded the Kickstarter for Gamer Nation Con 6. Mm-hmm. It is the most successful convention Kickstarter we've ever had.
Wow.
We have less than 20 tickets remaining for the event. And no less than 6 amazing listeners of your very show pledged for special badges just to have an exclusive game with a host of the Dice Pool.
Wow.
And there would have been more, but we limited it to 6 seats.
Those poor souls.
Well, now there's 4 of us. What does that mean? Does that mean, if there's, pickup games are plenty? Who knows?
Who knows? This was kind of the first year we did that, and since we saw that success, and maybe if you guys are willing, we'll open it up again to a larger audience next year. I'm super thrilled. It's all God. I can't wait. There's going to be so much amazing gaming. Our guest of honor, Mr. Whitwer, not Mr. Sam, Mr. Michael Whitwer.
Yep.
Most of the listeners of our show would probably go, "Oh, Sam Whitwer, oh, okay." But the rest of the world, if you said Mr. Whitwer, would go, "Oh, Michael Whitwer, the incredibly famous and talented author who, has written books about the history of Gary Gygax and called Empire of Imagination, which was his first big hit, and then most recently Art and Arcana, which is about the history of the artwork of Dungeons and Dragons." It's just incredible. He's going to be our guest of honor. He's going to be running some old school games. It's going to be epic. I don't know, man. What else do you want me to say?
I can't wait. I love it every year that I go, and I've gone, how many years have I been there now? This will be my third?
I thought it was your third.
It might be the third. But I've loved every single minute of it. So yeah, cannot wait. Yes, you'll be... Huzz, you'll be flying for... This isn't your first time flying, though, is it?
No. I've flown plenty of times. I just...
don't like it.
No, I don't. I'll be clear. I don't mind flying. And so I love the actual process of being on a plane. I'm not terrified of flying.
Right.
What I hate is being stuck in a small compartment with lots of other people because I don't like people.
See, I can just imagine this scene from Airplane playing out where you sit down on the plane and the person next to you sees how anxious you are and says, "Nervous?" And you go, "Yes." And they go, "First time?" And you go, "No, I've been nervous lots of times."
Oh dear, very good. So yeah, definitely looking forward to that. So for those who are going to Game & Action Con, we look forward to seeing you there. So we've got a little bit of a topic to discuss this evening.
Are you going to get to the meat of the show?
No, man, that's what you guys do. We call ours the core of the show.
Sometimes.
What do you mean sometimes?
Seems to be different every episode.
Core of the show. And welcome to Core of the Show, the segment where we take a deep dive into a topic concerning the Genesis role-playing game and, of course, gaming in general. Now, tonight, we have a listener request. We've received a message from Tyler Comstock via Facebook, who asks, "I've heard a lot about skill challenges on both the Order 66 podcast and the Dice Pool podcast, but I don't know what they are. How do you run them? How do you work out the difficulty? How many people can be involved? And how often should I get them to roll? I have so many questions, you need to do a show on it." Well, Tyler...
We're not going to. It's just a trick.
We just thought we might rehash your...
Get your hopes up.
Because we're all about destroying dreams. But anyway...
This is all about PC character socks they wear in episodes. So this is going to be a thrilling adventure.
Right. Yeah. Excellent. I can't wait.
Christmas socks? Easter socks?
No. Right, but anyway, Tyler, seriously, we are going to tackle what you've asked. So this evening, with the help of our esteemed guests, we're going to talk about this great house rule that can make your games fun and exciting, keeping everyone at the table engaged and building even more of that great story together. So first, let's look at where the almighty skill challenge started. Now for this, we cast your mind back to the days of 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and of course, Saga Edition. So Chris, tell us the history about where the skill challenge came from, since you've had a lot to do with that.
I don't know if I had a lot to do with it, but I was around for it. Interestingly enough, a lot of us were using this mechanic, but in kind of a rudimentary way, kind of in our home games. And it started to get used in Star Wars Saga Edition, and right around that same time, it also got codified in the Star Wars Saga Edition game, and one of the supplement books they had come out, and really close to the same time, they also, since it's kind of again Wizards of the Coast kind of doing that work, also put it into 4th edition, I believe, in Player's Handbook 2. I think. I'm not the biggest 4th edition guru.
Is anyone?
There are some who absolutely love the game, yes.
Wow.
But yeah, the idea was to, and one of the things that from a Star Wars standpoint we found was so thematic is Star Wars as a setting is very big on characters without combative capabilities being highly useful in a narrative situation. And that's something that's kind of a core of that setting, and one of the reasons I love it so much. And so it was kind of a way to codify that. And it kind of started there. But of course, it was all based on D20 and D20 rules. And so when Fantasy Flight released the Star Wars system, within a year of the beta, there were those of us, myself included, who were already trying to develop a skill challenge system or set of rules, a hack, to make it functional in the narrative dice system. And at this point, at least what I use and regularly has, in my opinion, even more polished more effective than what was there for the D20 system stuff. So, yeah.
Because as I said, sort of at the top of the episode, I probably use skill challenges at least once during a session, because to me they make storytelling just that little bit more easy. And it also means that all of the players at the table can have a collaborative input with regards to what's going on, using all of their skills. And getting them thinking about how to do things in a fairly sort of abstract way, and how they can maximise the use of the skills that don't often get looked at.
For those who may be listening and aren't overly familiar with what a skill challenge is, and we might be talking a different language to you until we obviously explain it further. Yep. But to get get yourself in the right frame of mind. The way I always picture a skill challenge is they're like an 80s montage in a film. They don't necessarily have to make sense in the way of how a timeline's structured.
Yep.
So think of your favourite moments in a montage, all compiled together to obviously get an end result. You see the characters slowly developing a set of skills or whatever the montage may be about. And by the end, they've achieved a goal. That's how I mentally paint a skill challenge in my head. And I find that's the best way. If I'm introducing someone to a skill challenge for the first time, I say, think of it as a montage. And immediately they go, oh, okay, I get it. And they sort of then know what to make of it.
Yep.
It's a bit of a help.
Exactly.
Yeah, for me, I think it's a way of adding that depth to non-combat related skills and also activity in the game. Because when you look at it from a combat perspective, you don't just roll one dice result and resolve the whole of the combat.
No.
It happens round to round, and you're rolling multiple times, and you're progressing towards a goal of defeating whatever the villains or monsters are that you've got to challenge.
Yep.
And in a lot of games, especially earlier on in the history of role-playing, they were more focused on that combat stuff and not on the non-combat stuff. So a lot of your non-combat things were resolved as a single skill check, which really, from a storytelling perspective, is frankly a bit boring. So skill challenges allow you to stretch that process out into a much more rich process.
Exactly.
Totally. And maybe we can talk about this later in the episode, but I've even run where you can mix a skill challenge with a combat encounter.
Oh, that's just crazy talk.
and it's where we can talk about this, where each round a PC is forced to either fight or contribute to the challenge. And then if you have, and that's very, very cinematic and what we see in films and television, a lot, but we can talk about that.
The interesting thing with skill challenges, and I know that, we're obviously a Genesis podcast, but skill challenges is not something that is new. It has been done in other systems, and we were talking about this before the show. Mick, you mentioned that it was done in the James Bond role-playing game.
Yeah, back in the 80s, I guess. Victory Games, James Bond role-playing game, had a system where all your skill results, whether they're combat or non-combat, were resolved through a quality rating system. And that quality rating system not only affected the damage you would deliver for combat, but it also reflected the quality of non-combat outcomes. So that was either translated into gameplay as a percentage of completed task, or a modification to base time required to complete what you're doing.
Right.
So that was one way of doing it. The other thing that came to mind, which was Rollmaster, from the old Table Master. There were You know, if you had non-combat stuff, there were tables in there which gave you percentage completed tasks in a similar fashion as well.
I think that the first time I used a skill challenge system before I probably knew what it was a skill challenge system was way back when I was running a Dark Heresy campaign using Eclipse Phases rules, and it had a margin of success system.
Right.
And I did a combat scenario using the skill challenge essentially, and the PCs had to basically breach and clear a room full of bad guys, and instead of cracking out the map and going into a combat which could drag on for an hour or so. So it was a small scene and I wanted it to be impactful still. I didn't want to hand wave it and say, yeah, you breached and cleared because you guys are experts and yada yada yada. That's not very interesting for the players. So what I did is I assigned everyone an initiative slot, and then they stormed this particular room. They described what their characters did while storming the room. That in turn fed what one character did would feed into the next character, what they did, and the total number of degrees of success determined how well they breached that room. If they met a certain threshold, they breached successfully. Yep. If they doubled the threshold, then they've breached it with suffering no ill effect. And it was a really impactful scene. Everyone at the table, because it was the first time anyone had done it, and straight away everyone knew what the concept was about. It was a montage-y type action-packed scene that lasts for only a couple of seconds, but it delivered the punch of an entire combat in a handful of dice rolls, which is really good.
Because that's what you want, especially when it comes to combat, is that you don't necessarily want to drag it out, because when combat happens or Starship combat happens, you're literally having to allocate about an hour of gameplay, depending on how big the combat is, obviously.
Well, there's always a time and place for combat, but stuff you want to do quickly, like a breach and clear, you want that to feel fast.
Yes,
you want that to have to carry that sort of that feel that a breach and clear has that lasts for 2 seconds in real life, if that. Yep. But on a tabletop, you suddenly break that immersion if it goes from half an hour to an hour, resolving that one simple scenario.
Yeah. I mean, that's two systems, and if we sort of jump forward to what the current systems are using, you look at Legend of the Five Rings, that with its intrigue system, it uses exactly the same type of mechanic, that you have momentum that you have to build up, and the more successes that you have, the more momentum you build up, and then once you reach a certain level of momentum, you achieve a certain goal. So the same sort of thing occurs, and you can have multiple almost skill challenges running in the one intrigue. So this is something that obviously is very, very useful for people, that is across multiple systems. So if you really want to get an idea as to what a skill challenge is, take a look through the rules, and you'll probably find something very, very similar. Now, we've talked about this sorcery for a little while now, but what actually is a skill challenge? Chris, let's take us through what a skill challenge actually is.
So I think it's important, though, to reiterate that what we're talking about here is, in essence, house rules. I mean, there's nothing official published about this in Genesis, obviously. But, I mean, I've been running skill challenge mechanics for at least 5 years in the narrative dice system in Star Wars and now in Genesis. And I've gone through so many iterations and rule sets. I've got this refined to what I find, at least, to be a preferred, best-tested, play-tested system of rules. And what a skill challenge is, basically, is the party making a lot of skill checks to accomplish a goal. And the goal here is to earn a number of total successes before a set number of failed checks, all as part of a narrative challenge. And every team member should be contributing in some way. And for each challenge, the GM can modify the needed successes or the number of failures to represent the inherent difficulty they want for that challenge. But we can talk about that too.
Absolutely.
So do you want me to dig into my rules, or?
Look, I think we can probably just have a roundtable discussion, really, on how each of us use it in our own games, and go from there. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's talk about the different types of levels of a skill challenge, because that's kind of what I use in my games. So I normally have 3 or 4 different sort of levels, depending on how long I want the skill challenge to go for. Now, obviously, with the number of successes, depending on the type of party that you've got, you may have a situation where their skills are just huge, like Dragon Squadron, for example, with their 1000 XP. That what was happening is that, if I wanted something quickly, I might say 5 successes before 3 failures. So that's 5 total successes that they have as far as the number of successes in that turn that they've rolled on their skill dice.
It's important to mention when we say successes, we mean successes, individual success icons on the dice.
Correct.
Opposed to the number of failed rolls. Because a lot of people get those two mixed up, and rightfully so, because it is mixed terminology. So it is it is a little bit like that. But if you're doing a light skill challenge, which has 10 successes before 5 failed checks, the party in total needs to have rolled 10 success symbols in total on the dice. So it is technically possible if someone rolls well enough and is skilled enough to pass a skill challenge in one check.
Absolutely.
Although that's pretty unlikely. But if someone's rolled 3 failed checks, you don't count the individual failed icons.
No.
That's a big thing to make clear to everyone before we dive into this too deeply.
Let's talk about why, though, because the thing is that if you're ever doing a house rule or any kind of custom rule, you want it to mirror the game mechanics that are already there as best as possible.
Correct.
And if you look at every other kind of check in the system, there are not degrees of failure. One uncanceled failure is the same thing as 7 uncanceled failures. Therefore, there's no degrees of failure. It's just a failed check. But there are degrees of success. 1 uncanceled success is not the same as 7 uncanceled success. Whether that's, for a vanilla skill check, more success can equate to a faster time threshold in some cases. And in the case of combat, more successes equals more damage. And the same should be true here. And so that's why that distinction is there between number of successes calculated versus individual failed checks.
Now, obviously setting difficulty levels of the check is one thing, and we'll get onto that in a tick. But first, let's talk about the number of successes that are required for the skill challenge. Now, what I do, and I'm not sure if the rest of you guys do it or not, but for skill challenges, I break them down into sometimes 3. That's the way I used to do it. But after a bit of revision, I've basically broken it down into 4 levels. Each of these levels have a number of successes earned before a number of failures, a number of failed checks. I've got light skill challenges, medium, hard, and tough. Now, a light skill challenge is 10 successes earned before 5 failed checks. Medium skill challenge is 10 successes earned before 3 failed checks. A hard skill challenge is 15 successes before 5 failed checks. And a tough skill challenge may be anywhere between 15 to 20 successes earned before 3 failed checks. Now, of course, you can mix and match those with low success totals with a low number of failed checks. Can represent easy to accomplish challenges, as I mentioned before, with a high risk of failure if you stuff up once or twice. Now, high success totals with a high number of failed checks represent, a bit of a grind where you may have a long slog through a deep forest or some sewers that you basically got to go from one side of the city to the next, where it takes a lot of effort to succeed, but there's still room to mess up quite a bit.
Yep.
All right, so that's the difficulty. That's the difficulty levels of the checks. So now let's talk about setting the difficulties themselves.
Okay, so there's two kinds of difficulties to talk about here. There's the difficulty of the challenge itself, which is what you were just referring to.
Yep.
The number of successes and versus failed checks. but then there is the difficulty of the skill checks within the challenge. My preferred method is I develop a handful of core skills for every challenge. So typically 4 to 6, sometimes less, right around 4. And those core skills I will have a set difficulty for. Now, what that difficulty is, I don't even know if we can cover that in this show. You guys have already done a show on difficulty. We just did a show on difficulty and how to assign appropriate difficulty to individual checks on the Order 66 podcast. But those same principles should apply here. But you have a base difficulty for your core skills. But the key thing about a skill challenge is you should allow your players to suggest any skill they want to use. You just got to give it a higher difficulty at that point.
Yep, exactly. And the other thing to take into consideration as well when it comes to this is that whatever skill that they are using, always promote the fact that if they've given a good narrative, descriptive reason why that particular skill is playing out in this skill challenge, throw them boost die. I can't reiterate that enough as far as, good suggestions and good role play needs to be rewarded, because that then will promote, and I know that we've spoken about this in another show, that will then promote people to do that. It
helps to keep people engaged in what's happening and
absolutely.
Yeah, and contribute in a narrative sense to what they're doing rather than just saying, I want to complete this task. What dice do I roll?
It encourages player creativity.
Yeah, exactly.
So with that aside, though, it is important to have these core skills set for the challenge you have. So, let me do this for you guys. Let me throw this at you. I'm gonna give you guys some examples of a skill challenge. Tell me what you think the 4 or so core skills, the easiest skills, should be for that challenge to give listeners a taste.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So let's say something. Let's say perhaps one of the most common skill challenges run out there: breaking and entering.
Right. Skullduggery is the first that comes to mind.
Yep.
Stealth. Yeah.
Stealth.
Mechanics.
Maybe.
Computers.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Perception. Yeah. Depending on how it's being run, you may even look at deception as well. If you're conning your way through.
Yeah, it could be. And so that's the thing. You want to define those things. It's when you think about the challenge you're trying to do, it's very easy to come up with those core skills. Now, what's cool is I guarantee you when you're running that challenge, the meat shield in the party is going to suggest coercion. And you say coercion, and he'll say, yeah, I want to scare away a guard patrol. And you go, absolutely, you can do that.
Yep.
And it's just going to be at a higher difficulty than those core skills.
That's right.
Okay, let me give you a couple others. Organizing an uprising among civilians.
Well, it's got to be leadership.
Yep, leadership. Charm. What else? Jeez, there's all. Way to stump us.
A knowledge skill in politics or social sciences. Yeah,
it could almost be any social skill.
Depending on where you are, it could be an appropriate knowledge skill.
Yeah, like who you...
knowledge government.
Knowledge. Yeah, too.
Negotiation.
Yeah.
Negotiation. Even coercion.
Yeah.
And then, people tend to think of skill challenges though in terms of so here's another example. I did a skill challenge once for organizing an uprising among civilians, and it was Star Wars, and the group was trying to get the local population to rise up against the Empire, and the Rhodian sharpshooter in the team said he wanted to use ranged heavy. And I'm like, what are you going to do? Shoot them? And he said, no. But seriously, we're trying to convince these guys that we can help them lead this uprising. I want to show off my skill. And he called to them, and he pointed to like a bell tower that was like 300 meters away, and he pulled out his extreme range rifle and took a pot shot and cut the cable that held the bell.
Right.
Right. And I was like, that's freaking awesome. I mean, I made that. I added like 2. That was like a +2 difficulty increase, but he made it.
Yep.
And it was great. It was great.
And that's probably a good time to mention that just because he's using ranged heavy, you wouldn't necessarily use the range attack difficulties you'd find in the regular combat rules. Because
absolutely not. Yeah,
skill challenges are supposed to be a little bit more abstract. They're not a 1-for-1 of what they may be in the core rules. Like for example, shooting that rope, may be very easy if it's point blank range, but in this case, he as a sniper wasn't just testing his ability to shoot. He was testing his ability to shoot and win the crowd over.
Yeah.
So it's a mixture of both social and prowess with his weapon. So that's why Chris, in that example, has upgraded the difficulty so much. In combat, he probably could shoot that rope in Star Wars, it's fairly fantasy, with not too much difficulty, but because he's trying to win the hearts of the audience over and not just look like some yobbo shooting ropes, the check is much harder. And he's obviously succeeded, and everyone in the crowd's that impressed by this elite sniper, and with him on their team, surely they can win, they can uprise against the Empire with so much more power now because he's on their side.
And let me tell you something to add to your point. Do you know how happy it made that player when he made that check?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because this is a dude who he was a one-trick pony. His agility at that point I think was a 5. Okay, and he was looking at he had a 3 yellow 2 green pool in ranged heavy. All right, and I'm sorry, most combat checks it's almost a non-event for him. He can make a 2 purple check with his eyes closed. He doesn't even have to try. But this gave me a reasonable chance to throw a tough difficulty at him. And he whistled when he saw it, too. He was like, ooh. When he made it, the whole table cheered.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it made him so happy. And so even if you have players that are that heavily invested in a particular skill, if you put them in a situation where that skill usage is outside the norm, you can really ramp up that difficulty and give that player a chance to legitimately shine.
And in that circumstance, too, where that player may have been sidelined for the purposes of that scene and the negotiation, you've now been able to draw him in and give him an active role to play in what's going on as well, which is awesome. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, Chris, in listening to that, is that given that the way or what skills can be used in these circumstances are very fluid, in that example you're talking about bringing in combat skills into that social encounter, what was your thinking for actually coming up with core skills for each of these sorts of challenge checks? Because from one way of looking at it is to effectively say having a core list of skills is really unnecessary because you can change that or modify that in any way, shape, or form. What was your thinking? What was your thinking about that?
I don't think it's necessary for an experienced GM, but I think if you're really coming out with this, it's a good idea to have them listed. And I'm sorry, you guys are experienced GMs. You know what it's like when you're in the middle of the table and your wits leave you.
Yes.
I'm a fan of having everything planned out, and it's one of the things that I want to be able to look down at my piece of paper, and I want to be able to quickly remind myself what 4 to 6 common skills are, especially if my players are stumped and they're going, then you can prompt them with some potential skills. I've even done this now where I won't even just list core skills. I'll have 4 core skills and I'll list the low difficulty for them. And then I'll have other skills, another 4 that I'll say, okay, if they choose these, they're a little bit out of the box. This is the difficulty for that. If you need that. But at the same time, this is intended to be narrative. But the other side of that question, the other side of that coin is the fact that some things really are out of the box and you should always allow it. But at the same time, it's ridiculous to go to take a knife to a gunfight. So if you're in a social encounter and the guy says, I want to use ranged heavy, you need to give that a much harder difficulty than a social skill.
Yeah.
If you're breaking and entering, and the guy says, well, it depends on what setting you're in Genesis, obviously. But
sure.
If you're breaking and entering into if you're in a fantasy setting and you're breaking into a wizard's abode, and the guy says, yes, I want to use knowledge ship making. Okay, it's like okay, yeah, I'll let you try, justify it, and 4 purple difficulty. Here you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually a really good breaking point there, because that character wants to use his knowledge of shipbuilding.
Yeah.
So if he's determined, let him, if the player, say to the player, describe it to me, how you're using this shipbuilding skill,
yep.
and get them to be narratively describing it. Don't sit back and just let them have, say some weird excuse. Have them narratively explain and describe to everyone at the table what their character's doing in a part of the skill challenge where his knowledge in boating skills comes in handy. Heck, he can flip a story point and say that wizard is a big boating fanatic himself, and he runs into the wizard at the local bar and gets talking to him about ships and boats, and ties the wizard up for an hour while the rest of the party break into the house.
See, that's creative.
That is brilliant.
That's cool.
That's one of those times I'd be like, wow, okay, harder difficulty, flip a story point, and you're golden.
But it goes from being a out there core of a skill to being, that actually makes sense if the player thinks about it and puts it in a narrative.
And I guess
sense to it.
And I guess that's the key thing. Rather than people looking at their character sheet and saying, "Well, I've got massive ranks in this skill here. I'm just going to use this because it gives me the greatest chance of success." It's more about them coming up with that rationale behind how they can apply the abilities of their character in a circumstance to gain advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just on that, one of the things that I think this sort of the skill challenge does allow for that isn't done very often, but it is possible using the rules. And I know that we've discussed it in the past, and I know that, Chris, you've discussed it on your show. But it's decoupling your attribute from your skills. So if you've got a situation that you're wanting to, purchase a large number of weapons or to resource this rebellion that you're talking about, Chris, is that the PCs might say, right, well, I'm going to use my knowledge of weaponry to find the best weapons possible. The agility skill agility attribute may not be appropriate in this circumstance. So it might be a case of, well, your knowledge of it, why don't you use your intellect coupled with your range skill, so that you've got that sort of combination of attributes and skills that don't normally go together, but can sort of add flavour to the scenario and make it more appropriate.
Well, another good example of that is the one I just used with the distracting the wizard with the boating discussion. You could use your ranks of knowledge in shipping and use your presence, because you're not only trying to engage the wizard on a topic you know about, you're also trying to engage him on a social level. And trying to be more talkative. And that's when your presence will come into play. So you could do a charm check, a knowledge shipping or boating or whatever you want to call it, check using your presence instead of your intellect. Because you may be a very intellectual character, knows a lot about shipping, but you may have horrible presence. So the check, you know a lot about boating, but you're not great at distracting people and keeping them busy. You can talk about your passionate subject for hours, but can you keep someone interested in your discussion for hours? So that's the jamming of, as you're saying, the two different skills and attributes together.
Absolutely.
The concept of doing what you're describing was originally communicated, I think, to everyone by Jay Little, who obviously created the narrative dice system. I have played with that so much. I've done a lot of games where we allowed that to happen. It is so much fun, but I do want to advise caution. Okay, for a couple reasons. And this is just, and again, guys, this is just hard-learned experience here, okay? Your play group, your players have to be exceptional in the sense that they're not going to abuse it. One, and two, if you have, right now, you can do this in Genesis a lot better than you can do it in Star Wars. And the reason is, in Star Wars, now that it's a 5-year-old mature system, there are talents, and talents are very different in Star Wars than they are in Genesis. They're a lot more granular. There are talents in Star Wars that allow players to do characteristic substitution for skills. And if there is a rule that allows you to do it, and somebody can or has invested XP into doing that, don't take their XP and their choice away from them by letting anybody do it.
Oh, absolutely.
That comes back.
That's the only caution I can provide.
And that sort of comes back to your earlier comment about keeping your mechanisms within the framework of existing rules. And, as Genesis sits, whilst it may be possible to decouple an attribute with a skill, ordinarily that's not what's laid out for you in the rules system, and it would only be done in very, very exceptional circumstances, if at all.
The most successful I've ever seen it used is when a group took the system and paired the skill list in half. So, for example, they have a skill called Combat.
Right.
You don't have melee and ranged light and ranged heavy and gunnery. You have Combat. And, Combat plus Intelligence, that's used for ship weapons. Combat plus Brawn, that's used for melee weapons. Combat plus Agility, that's used for ranged weaponry. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. And we're way off topic at this point, but yeah, that is the most successful I've seen that done.
Yep. Yeah. Legend of the Five Rings does it as well. That it skills. It does. The skills.
It's the core mechanic of the system.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just got the skill list and then not attached to attributes at all. And then the approach that you're using determines what ring that you use. So, that's sort of, let's face it, Elf-Havar is sort of the system that they're using now is related to the years of playtesting that have gone on with the narrative dice system. So yeah, definitely there. But anyway, as you say, we've kind of gone off topic.
So I'm pretending to be a listener here. I'm listening to us talk.
Right.
So you guys, we've discussed, the very nutty, crunchy bits of a skill challenge.
Yep.
The challenge, how what difficulty to use, what skills to use, and etc., and how to implement them. How do we physically do it at the table? If I'm Joe Blogg sitting at the table, how do I participate in a skill challenge? What does it look like at the table?
Okay. So what a skill challenge will look like is that obviously the GM, and they don't have to do this, and I've seen it done both ways, but they would normally announce to the table how many successes are required.
Yep.
Then
I don't.
You don't? Right? I've done it both ways. So.
I know I've done it both ways. What I'm telling you now is, if you just say you're in a skill challenge and you let them go, if they get there too fast, you can fudge it.
That's very true.
Or if the rolls are crap and the players aren't having fun, you could reduce the number of needed successes can fudge it.
That is true.
So you're seeing the skill challenge and telling us or not telling us the difficulty rating.
Yep.
Depending on how much of a jerk you're being that day, but it's okay. We forgive you. You paint the picture for us.
Yep.
Okay, we're breaking into this house of an affluent mayor of the town who we suspect is corrupt and has drug cartel money coming from all different directions. We want to find proof of this.
So why are we breaking in? What's the point? Just raise a
because we're player characters. So, that's all we know.
How come it's not a lawful covert warrant?
It could be.
Wow.
That's going to come down. That's going to come down the skill challenge, isn't it? Okay, I'll reframe. The GM Ian said to us, we have to break into this house.
Yep.
In a manner we see fit.
Right.
We have to gain access to this house.
That's right.
And gather evidence of this guy's corruption. All right. So you've set the skill challenge for us. All right. So how do the players start diving into that? Is there an order in how this happens?
So the way that it's suggested that it's being done is that every player at the table gets one attempt to partake in this skill challenge, and that's so that you ensure that everybody at the table has some level of input, and you're not having one person just taking over the entire skill challenge. I've also seen it with an additional rule thrown in there that the same skill can't be used by the same person twice.
I like that rule. Otherwise, you get someone just farming their best ability constantly.
Yep, that's right. So the two rules of thumb are everybody at the table must have at least one attempt, so one round robin, for want of a better term, first, and they can only use that one skill once during the entire skill challenge.
Yep, okay. And so do we just start at any point at the table? Does someone announce they want to go first? Or?
So it depends on, obviously, the scenario. But the suggestion is that we would, I would be asking, okay, so who would like to start this process off? How do you intend to go about doing this?
So there's no particular order. It's whatever player might have the most creative idea first, essentially. Gets the ball going.
So what this reminds me of is Ocean's 11.
Yes.
Exactly.
When you have all these different highly skilled and talented individuals all standing around their big table spread where they've got they've got everything sort of laid out, all their Matchbox cars and little buildings there, and they're all discussing how they're going to approach this whole thing of breaking into the vault and stealing all the money from the casino.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the best example of the skill challenge montage ever. Because the action is happening simultaneously, but you can imagine the players at the table, okay, so you guys are in the vault. But what you didn't know is that yesterday I dug a tunnel underneath the facility and planted an explosive charge, and they make a mechanics check, right?
Right.
And you're skipping back and forth, and that's God, what a great example. Ocean's 11, fantastic example.
And that gives the players that opportunity where they can literally sit around a table and debate the pros and cons of all these different approaches to settle on this narrative of how they're going to complete the task that they want. And along the way, you can have each person contributing their dice roll. They go, yep, definitely, we're digging that tunnel.
And that's
right. Make your roll.
And that's a really important thing. Ocean's 11 again is a perfect example of it. Your skill challenge, a skill challenge doesn't have to be linear. A person can introduce a narrative fact for a skill challenge description. They're doing something, digging the tunnel. Right? They make the check to dig the tunnel. They succeed. The next player in the party goes, well, I actually did all this to help dig that tunnel. And he does some knowledge education check to obtain all the heavy earth moving equipment required to gain access to start even digging that tunnel. So you don't have to, skill challenge doesn't have to be in linear order. It just has to make narrative sense.
That's right. Yeah.
So you can play it safe and do linear order. One player describes one action they're doing in the skill challenge. Another player does the next action that's happening in that skill challenge. It just feeds on like that. But the more comfortable I think a group gets with the skill challenge, they can start really getting Ocean's 11 with it and very creative with their montage and what they do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because you can always summarize that in linear order at the end as the GM.
Exactly.
Say, okay, well, this is what you've decided on and what you do, and then you can bring it all together in everyone's mind. But along the way, you've already made all the dice rolls and you know where they sit if it's, in GM Chris's style. Cruelly kept secret in terms of the result. You can roll that all out as a narrative for them from start to finish, and then reveal what happens as a result.
So,
and some challenges are going to lend themselves to this montage nonlinear style. Some aren't.
Exactly.
You got to keep in mind. I mean, in Star Wars, one of the most common skill challenges I tend to frequently run is a great way when you have a bunch of players stuck on a starship and there's only one pilot. Getting through an asteroid field.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I mean, at that point, you've got one guy saying, okay, I'm going to run down and do this to the deflector array. I've got one guy, I'm going to run down and monkey with the engine to give us more thrust. I'm going to get on the computer system and analyze navigation patterns, right? And they can all, I'm going to inspire the others with my leadership. And that's happening in a pseudo-linear fashion in the sense that you really can't montage yourself back and I arrived in this asteroid field 2 days ago and seated the place with mine. It doesn't. So it still needs to, and this comes to the crux of what you just said though. What they suggest and how they do it still needs to fit the narrative.
Exactly.
That's right.
Of the scene itself.
That's right.
So us back at the table then.
Yes.
We're going around the table. Each player is taking one turn in making a check of some variety and narratively describing what they're trying to achieve in that check.
Now, one interesting point is that obviously with the Genesis system and Star Wars alike, is that there are going to be triumphs and threats and advantages and despairs that are thrown along the way.
Mostly despairs.
Now, I know that I've had it suggested to me with regards to these is that sometimes a triumph will be enough to make it through the skill challenge and that's it. I find that a little bit meh. The same with despair, that basically it will completely fail it. I don't like that idea at all.
It's a 1 in 12 chance of auto fail or auto
That's
success,
right. So I much prefer to have it so that people use the results of the ancillary results, which are all your advantages and threats and despairs and triumphs, to add to the scene, that when they describe that scene with those results, that then will perhaps prompt another player to go, well, with that schematic that you've managed to find, which actually shows the all of the hidden corridors that are all, abandoned underneath this particular warehouse, that I'm now going to use that to do this, whatever it might be, and that might upgrade the check if it's a triumph, or it might, obviously it'll have a mechanical effect as well.
So I have like you've got to. I have a set of very concrete rules for that I use that have play tested out for me over the last 5 years, and like this is an encounter. Okay, so like to your earlier point about about a triumph winning the skill challenge, would a triumph instantly end a combat encounter?
No, exactly.
Probably not. The same way despair wouldn't instantly cause you to lose it. So in a skill challenge, I treat advantage and threat just like you could use them in combat. Yeah, you need to narratively describe it, but they add boost die or setback die to future checks in the skill challenge. Yep. Okay, and all narratively speaking. You got one advantage. You want to throw a boost die to the next player. Narratively describe that for me. You got two advantage. You want to pick the player who's going to get it and really narratively describe it. Go ahead. The same for threat and setback, but for triumph or 3 advantage, I kind of have an odd rule I use. Yes, you can use it to fully upgrade the ability of a future check, totally, like you just said. Or despair could be used to fully upgrade the difficulty of a future check. I also, specifically on Triumph, allow Triumph to earn extra successes on the total. Depending, because that's very fitting for a Triumph for me. I mean, you still have to narratively describe it for me and how that Triumph comes into play, but how that manifests mechanically in the challenge is... Okay, you get your total successes, but gosh, you want to spend your triumph to get an extra 2 successes to your total? Describe that for me. That's a really good use for triumph. I don't do the same for despair because the economy is not the same, because it's not number of failures, it's number of failed checks, and those are typically very small. So you don't want to tack on another failed check for a despair. That's very crappy. But for triumphs, yeah, totally. Add an extra. Offer them. Hey, you want an extra success or 2 added to your total. Narratively, is that your mechanical result of the narration you just described?
Would you, Chris, GM Chris, just I'd appreciate some of your additional thoughts in that space. Would you use triumphs and despairs to flow on out of context of the skill challenge that's being done? So what I mean by that is you might roll up a triumph, for example, but rather than giving them additional successes or other contributions to the skill challenge, it might have been, in a sci-fi setting, someone needing to gain some kind of access pass to get through a security protocol. And in the process of engaging with that NPC, they roll a triumph, and you might decide that they then form some kind, like gain an ally or a contact as a result of that.
So the answer from my perspective is yes and no. When it comes to triumph, it's the player's decision how the triumph is spent.
Sure.
So if the player says, I don't want it to apply in this challenge at all. Instead, I want to have XYZ happen, to affect us later in the session. I'll say, okay, that's how you want to spend your triumph. Totally cool. Obviously, despair. I mean, you absolutely can. I mean, I'll be blunt. It's sometimes it's not easy to think like this as a GM, especially when you're in the heat of trying to manage things. It's a lot easier for a GM to always apply a despair to the current scenario. But I'm sorry, despair is the most fun and the most best used when you can stick it in your pocket and pull it out for a completely, all right, you guys succeeded on the skill challenge, but unbeknownst to you, you alerted security.
Yeah. And now they've got a photo of you, and there's an intel report in circulation.
That's right. Yep.
Exactly. I actually can point you to an example of that. One of the I did a series of games that, if listeners to the Order 66 podcast might be aware of, called Inglorious Rebels. Are you guys familiar with that?
Yes, I am. Yep.
So it's like the movie Inglorious Bastards, and they just do this for the rebellion. I actually had a skill montage where they were having to break into a Black Sun research facility to steal a group of experimental starfighters so that they could masquerade as Black Sun people when they were hitting an Imperial base.
Right.
And they did the skill challenge, but one of them rolled a despair. And I said, I'm going to stick that in my pocket. And it turned out later on that, they stole the fighters, but they left evidence of their own presence behind. They won the skill challenge, so they succeeded, and the Empire was fooled, but now Black Sun knew who they were.
So this reminds me, I'm just going to say this, throw this in here just for GM Caitlin's benefit, because in her absence, I think it's appropriate. So all this reminds me of Firefly and the episode Janestown. Where Jane's completing his heist and they're escaping and he rolls his despair and has to dump the loot. And consequently, when he comes back to town, he's been idolized, which causes all sorts of problems for the team.
Yep.
Still one of my favorite episodes.
Great example and a great episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about removing failed success or failed checks in the scene? Because obviously you can you have to basically make a number of successes before 3 failed checks. What happens if that you failed on your 3rd check, but you've rolled 2 triumphs?
For me, 2 triumphs is worthy to remove a failed check.
Yep.
Not 1 triumph, but 2. I mean, that's hardcore stuff. You want to flat out remove. I mean, seriously, even if that's your 3rd check, if you succeeded, but you guys are sitting at 2 fails right now, the GM has informed you at 3 fails, you're toast, and the only player who has yet to go has horrific skill options and has been rolling like crap, and they're probably going to fail the check.
I was going to say
kill it for
GM
you guys. And I want to spend my 2 triumphs to bring us down to 1 failure instead of 2.
Right.
I would allow that for 2 triumphs. Yeah.
Yep.
And of course, that would require some pretty awesome narrative description from the player and or the GM alike.
Yeah.
So how are these 2 triumphs? How does that look like? Because that's something pretty epic. That's almost like, I don't want to say it, but in a movie, that's almost like a self-sacrifice sort of thing. I could see a character staying behind, clutching the detonator for the explosives because his legs have been broken. Like obviously, that's not necessarily the case in a role-playing game because that'd be a PC death. But in a movie, that's what that sort of equivalent sort of thing would be. They've failed. In inverted commas, failed, but those 2 triumphs, he stays behind, sacrifices himself, and buys enough time for his friends to get out and succeed that check because of the double triumphs.
Yeah.
So you have to be pretty powerful description behind that, I think. Yeah.
So let's talk about failure for a tick.
I'm good at that.
Because that's part of the skill challenge. I mean, obviously, you have to do a number of successes, as I mentioned before 3 failures. So what actually happens, and what are the rules behind a failed check? So one of the 3 failures, and then what actually happens if you completely fail the skill challenge?
I know for myself what I've been getting into doing is even before, at the very, very genesis of that skill challenge.
Yep.
Outline what will the players get from the success.
What the stakes are.
What the stakes are, exactly. Yep. And what will happen if you fail the check. So the players have a sense of foreboding because they know that the big bad's going to catch them and do something vicious if they fail this check or something like that. Yeah. Paint that picture early.
Some good emotional buy-in.
Exactly. Don't paint it too clearly. So then in that case, if there is degrees of, advantage or threat at the end, depending on how badly or how unbadly they fail the skill challenge, you can adjust it slightly. But I find if you give them that sense of forewarning of what can happen, it makes that upcoming skill challenge gives a lot more presence and a lot more weight. That's how I feel.
I agree.
That's a personal thing, though.
You've got to treat a skill challenge like any normal encounter. I mean, this is core adventure design. If you build a combat encounter into your adventure, and they fail the combat encounter, okay, if half the party drops and they're forced to retreat, what happens? What happens to your story?
GM wins.
All right. I mean, but the answer to that question is the same thing as if you fail a skill challenge. It's just another encounter. Yeah. You've got to have another way for them to do it.
Yeah.
To proceed just in less of an easy fashion or with reduced goals that they can achieve, and that's not a piece of advice for skill challenge. That's a piece of advice for encounter design. I mean, you got to have that for every encounter you run. They're going to fail. They could fail. Yep. What if they fail?
Well, and that's something too. Start again. For newer GMs, that may be a challenging thing to consider, and my encouragement would be prepared to throw that back to your players as well, to say, well, this avenue of approach has failed, and how can you now salvage that or redirect it in some other way?
Yes.
Because I think a lot of players and GMs alike can see failure in a narrative as a dead end. There's nothing that stops. The story can't go on from there on in. Incorrect. Some of the best stories come from failure. If you look at a perfect example of one giant failed skill challenge, that's the latest Avengers movie. They all fail at the end.
Yeah, that's true.
And the story's not over. So we're all eagerly
awaiting.
Only
half of them failed.
Well, I don't feel so good.
I don't want to go. Oh, dear.
But no, that's a perfect example. That the whole movie is one big skill challenge. They try and they're cocky at the start. They think they can beat the big bad, and they ultimately don't. Spoilers. But if you haven't seen it, sorry.
Yeah. It's been long enough.
Yeah, that's it. But yes, they've failed that skill challenge, but the story's not over, and it's going to lead for another really interesting story in the upcoming movie.
Yeah.
And that's one way of looking at skill challenges. Just because it's a failure tells the best story.
Yes. And a smart GM will have a couple avenues planned in case your players get stumped.
Yep.
In the Inglorious Rebels game that I mentioned earlier, where we ran that skill challenge to steal the Black Sun fighters, what happens if they fail? Well, that was a pre-written mod, so I didn't want to leave it too free form. And the idea was, okay, well, your handler has a secondary form of transportation lined up, but it's slow, so you're going to get there a lot slower. You're not going to have enough time to prepare once you arrive. Additionally, you're going to have to smuggle yourself in a cargo hold. You're going to have to sneak off once you arrive. You're not going to have an easy way of egress out of this facility once you get there, as opposed to arriving in your own little squadron of fighters.
Yep.
And, there were secondary mission goals they had to achieve that they wouldn't get a chance to because they didn't have starfighters. One of their secondary mission goals was to take out the orbital defense grid. Well, you can't do that if you're smuggled onto the planet in a freighter. I mean, stuff like that. They can still proceed with the main story and the main adventure, just at less of an easy time of it.
And I think with skill challenges too, you have to accept, unlike a combat encounter, skill challenges are more likely to fail because most combat challenges in Genesis or any other role-playing game, usually the players win, ultimately at the end of the day, because the GM doesn't want to kill all his players. So that's why you have to be prepared, that I find anyway, you have to be prepared that a skill challenge is probably going to fail sometimes, more often than a regular encounter that's not a skill challenge.
That's an interesting point. I've never really thought about that before.
You're spot on, too.
Yeah.
And that's superb advice. I ran one. There's one module I wrote with a skill challenge to get through an asteroid field, and land on a planet. And if you fail, your ship crashes into the planet surface. Okay, I mean the players still walk out; they're fine. But then at the end of the adventure, it's like, okay, how are we getting home? They're stuck there, and it's just But I ran that mod. I've probably run that mod 12 times, and I think 50 to 60% of the time they fail. That skill challenge. It doesn't stop the story, doesn't stop the fun, but
I think because it's just making me reflect on times, games that I've run and even games I've been part of, and it's almost as if in the skill challenge spectrum of things, that's the opportunity for a GM to introduce failure into the game more often than in combat, because combat has a potentially like a finality to it in terms of your participation in the game, whereas with your skill challenge, quite often it doesn't. There's that opportunity to fail and things to not go right, and players have to think up how they're going to work around what's just happened.
Well, I guess it's kind of like the combat versus social combat, that no one's ever going to die, well, within reason, from a social combat. But there are going to be...
Depends on
the social combat, I guess.
You've clearly never been to some of my management meetings.
But I think that it boils down to that people are more accepting of a failure in a social encounter than what they are in a combat encounter. And I don't think there is actually any difference between the two. And I think that that's probably a good thing, as Huzz said. If you're running any sort of encounter, not just a skill challenge, always at the beginning, keep the end in mind. So know what the results are going to be if they succeed and if they fail, and have that in the back of your head so that when you don't get to the end of it going, oh crap, where am I going from here? So always keep the end in mind. So yeah.
Well, okay, let's talk about death and injury in a skill challenge. So I have two potential options for you here. So Hooly, you've run my Forgotten adventure for Star Wars.
I have, yes.
The Amnesia Adventure.
Yep.
Which is available for free download at d20radio.com.
Which one was that?
Sorry?
Which one was that?
I haven't actually run it for you, Huzz. This was the Forgotten module.
I haven't forgotten it.
Oh, no. That's terrible.
Well, at the end of Act 2 of the second the second session of that 3-session adventure, the players are in a hut-controlled casino floating above the skyline of Nar Shaddaa.
Yep.
Well, Hooly, I had a group run that once, and one of the guys hit a triumph and decided that he was going to activate some automated defense systems of the casino and shoot down the ship try and shoot down the ship that was dropping the insurgents onto the place. There was a gunship floating above the casino.
Yep.
So he made his checks and he rolled a despair.
Right.
He succeeded with a despair.
Right.
The despair resulted in that ship crashing into the casino. So the entire casino is now plummeting from about 3 kilometers in the air straight down.
Right.
It's high stakes.
That's high stakes. Now, as Hooly well knows, we're off mod at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So at that point, it was like, well, oh my gosh, let's have a skill challenge. All right. Now, that was, and you can imagine in my head, I'm thinking to myself, okay, what do they need to do to get to a docking bay in time and get to a ship to get out before this thing pancakes at the bottom of Nar Shaddaa? And they were rolling athletics, they were rolling resilience, they were rolling coordination, vigilance, and the facility is rocking, shaking, and falling apart. Chunks of it are falling on people's heads. People are screaming and running everywhere.
Yep.
Every despair that was rolled during those checks, as well as I believe 2 or 3 advantage, I would spend to inflict a minor critical injury on one of those characters, whoever rolled it. If they rolled a despair, I would inflict a major critical injury on them.
Right.
Okay. And so those guys walked out of that skill challenge critically injured, like 3 of them. Okay, from a skill challenge. All right. So there's one avenue. The other avenue, and I said I'd talk about this before, guys, is you can, if you get good at this, you can insert a skill challenge into the middle of a combat encounter. Combat encounter starts up just like normal. People are shooting at you, they're trying to stab you, do whatever, but at the same time, you inform the party, okay, guys, you've got to defuse the bomb, or you've got to find the data and get out of here.
Yep.
We are also in a skill challenge. You run initiative like normal, and each round, a PC has to decide whether they are going to contribute to the combat encounter and fight off people, or whether they're going to contribute to the skill challenge. And if you're going to do that, you also need to set a timer on the skill challenge. Where it's not just it's like, okay, you failed, but beyond that, you can also say like for 5 failed checks or 3 failed checks or whatever. But you can say, guys, you've got 5 rounds to get this skill challenge complete, or you're out of time.
Yep.
And that sort of thing is interesting because it separates the party at a micro scale, and it means the guys who are the frontline fighters, they are going to have to be the 100% frontline fighters to hold off the storming battle droids. While the
say that.
Well, I do, but the non-combative guys, their role becomes even more important because they go to the back line and desperately and frantically trying to defuse this bomb. But then if someone rolls a despair, the GM goes, "Well, guess what? You didn't see that destroyer droid roll in behind you lot."
Yeah.
And the immediately from that skill challenge, you've added something to the combat, and the frontline fighters who are holding the wave of enemies at bay has to step away from that fight and jump down there to fight the destroyer droid all of a sudden. And it adds so much dimension to an ordinary combat, which is great.
Okay, Star Wars Rogue One is a great example of a skill challenge.
Yes.
In the middle of a combat.
Yes.
Okay. All those guys, they're on the beach on Scarif, and oh my god, you've got to flip the master control switch. All right. Stormtroopers are shooting at them. They're shooting back. It is combat. But you've got guys that are running, trying to get to this master control switch at the same time. And some of them are sacrificing their combat actions to do so, and they're getting shot. And if you put this in the middle of a combat encounter, it becomes a little less narrative because you've got movement that comes into place. At that point, if you have a described scene or even a map, you can even say, oh, you want to do that computers check for the skill challenge? Fantastic. The terminal is over there.
Yep.
You've got to get there, and then your action is spent to make the check. You can have a lot of fun with this.
Yes, indeed. And I think if you go through any sort of film, and it doesn't matter what it is, and it doesn't necessarily need to equate to the montage sequence, there are going to be instances like that if you're looking for a visualization of how a skill challenge would appear on film. Because that's what I always look at when I'm running a game. How would this look on film? And this is probably the reason why I love the skill challenge. And when the question came up to cover this, I jumped on it because it is such. I'm actually surprised that FFG haven't brought this into a rule set. And hopefully, Sam, you'll do that in the future. But yeah,
could we just summarize the process of how you would do that? Because we've talked about a lot of different aspects of things, and for people who are unfamiliar with all of this process, it may become a little bit confusing. So it might be a good opportunity to just summarize how the skill, how the skill check actually would work around the table. Not to go into all the detail again, but just the high level approach, because you're talking about each person getting a dice roll and how that would roll out.
Sure. So basically, as Mick sort of suggested before, Huzz suggested before, because you're Mick.
I'm Mick.
We're all Mick.
We're all Mick.
I'm Mick too.
Hi, Mick. Now you're just taking the Mickey.
Oh, God. All right, so what you have is that the GM, in their mind, whether they're communicating it to the players or not, determines how many successes are going to be required before 3 failures in a check. Everybody around the table, after the GM has communicated what the scene is or what the scenario is and how they're going to, how the players are going to resolve that, then take turns around the table in sort of a round robin, and it doesn't need to be in any particular order. It's just whoever is feeling motivated to start the thing, and the players then bounce off each other to come to
and so once
an order.
So once everyone's has inputted their turn, that completes a turn or a round of the game, and then you would continue that process
and start up again. Absolutely,
until they've either succeeded by accumulating the number of successes required, or have failed by accumulating the 3 failures.
3 failures, exactly right.
Gotcha.
Triumphs, threats, despairs, advantages, they're all then used throughout the encounter, or, as you mentioned before, you can use those later on down the track to have some sort of an effect.
Develop your storyline, add flavour, depth, whatever.
Yep. Or they can be used during the encounter to upgrade people's checks, throw in additional threats, like whether it be that translates into strain cost or it translates into setback die or whatever else.
Right, okay.
So that's pretty much what a skill challenge is. So I think probably the best way that we can describe exactly how one of these things works is to run a short skill challenge here live on the show.
Yay!
Sound good?
Awesome.
I'm ready.
Right. Okay, so this is completely off the cuff, so it will either go really, really well or completely, totally fail. So let's see what happens.
We got this.
All right. So let's use, because we talked about it in the last episode, let's talk Terranoth. So this scenario is going to be in Terranoth, and I really like what Huzz suggested before about the corrupt mayor's mansion. He has been stealing and obtaining some rune stones for an unknown purpose, and the PCs have got to the point where they don't really know what he's doing with them, and they need to know more.
Well, not just that. We woke up one morning and our rune stones were stolen.
Ah!
So we tracked it back to this mayor.
Because you've heard about this guy. So what I'm just gonna make it easy that all of you have 3 in whatever attribute that you're going to use, and then one rank in that skill. That's probably going to be easier rather than creating characters off the cuff. So that's the scenario.
That's another episode.
That's another episode. Yeah. So let's quickly talk about, for this scenario, I'm thinking that I'm going to communicate how many the skill challenge as far as the number of successes that are going to be required before 3 failures. So in this circumstance, I'm going to suggest it's going to be 12 successes are going to be required before 3 failed checks.
Before 3.
Before 3.
This is a juicy challenge then.
It is a juicy challenge.
Okay.
Right.
Lucky we're skilled.
So who would like to go first?
With a rank 1 skill.
All right. So we're trying to break into a manor.
Yes.
And obtain the runestones or evidence of the theft.
Evidence of what he's actually up to.
Okay.
As well as, obviously, if you can recover the runestones, you can do that as well.
Sure. Okay. Cool.
Who'd like to go first?
Well, I'll go first.
Okay.
Well, I'm playing, my character is a very sort of sneaky rogue type.
Right.
Who's very familiar with life on the streets. That's where she grew up. So we need to obviously learn about this mansion and what's going on, because when you were around here, we've not actually scouted it out. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to spend a couple of days on the streets around the mansion, just staking it out more or less, seeing what security is there, what the guards are doing, what the patrols are like, who comes and goes, and etc. So we're not going in completely blind, and depending on how well I roll, I could even discover rear entrances and whatnot to this place. So I'm going to do a streetwise check,
right?
If I could, to blend into the street and be an urchin for a few days, more or less.
Sure. So in this scenario, because it's you're doing it at various times over the next few days, so that I would set a difficulty, let's say an average sort of check.
Okay.
Now, the mayor who is sort of behind all of this, or the gentleman that's behind all of it, has still got his own spies, so you can also have 2 setback die.
Okay.
As they're keeping a watch out for people who might be asking questions.
All right. However, maybe I've obtained some local rags essentially, so I look like an urchin. So I blend in a little bit more.
Okay.
So I'm going to flip a story point that we totally have, and I'm going to say I've acquired these clothes and upgrade my check once.
Nice.
Okay, so let's do this. Oh. Well, it's a failure.
Right.
Like I normally do, with 1 threat.
Yep.
But there is a triumph there.
Right. So what does that look like?
Well, I like to think that maybe this mayor is so secretive that I can't even see beyond the walls of his of his mansion. So I can't even tell what security's there. So I come back with almost no information.
Right.
But with the triumph, potentially. In this scenario, okay, with the triumph, although this place is heavily, heavily walled, I do notice there is a sewer access on the street that runs parallel to the mansion.
Yep.
I can't say for certain if that's a way to get in there, but I've definitely eyed it, and I think that's potentially something we can use later on down the track.
Perfect.
So I'll keep that triumph there as an upgrade to a check or something, depending on what people narratively describe next.
Yep, absolutely.
So, that's me.
Very good. Who'd like to go next?
Ooh, well, okay. So I'm thinking that my gnome scholar in Tyranoth, who's a rune master, is obviously going to try and, while this is going on, also in this montage, is going to be kind of casing the area, but more importantly, doing a little bit of rune work and maybe a little bit of detection to attempt to divine if there's any runic magic being emanated from any particular part of the compound, so that we can know where to target our search, or maybe where to go in to attempt to locate any immediate evidence of malfeasance. And I don't know, man. I'm thinking, I could use runes, but I'm thinking maybe also lore. What do you think?
Yeah, look, either one would do fine. Depends on which way you want to go. I'm thinking that if you're using runes, because you are trying to detect, that the difficulty would be just 2 purple dice. He's obviously got some protections as well, because he knows what he's doing. So, that'll be a setback die for that. But if you want to use lore, you can use that as well, but that will be at 3 difficulty. So that'll be a hard check.
Ooh, see, now I've got a tough choice here, because I have knack for it lore, so I could remove that setback die. But, excuse me, there's no setback die to lore, right? Just for runes.
No, there's no setback die because it can't be used on magic skills.
And since I couldn't take knack for it on my magic skills, I still think I'm better off going with the 2 purple and a black. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm gonna bring my 2 yellow and 1 green against 2 purple and a black, and I've got my Genesis dice rolling app up, and here we go. Okay, 3 successes.
Nice.
With a threat.
Ooh. So you've obviously taken some strain from using the spells to do that. Perhaps there is some type of ward that when you penetrate the magic field, that suddenly there's a bit of backlash, and you take a point of strain.
Boo. Okay.
So that's 3 successes and 1 failure so far.
I'll keep tally of that, shall I? On here.
Yep.
I think we're in trouble.
So, Mick.
Right. Well, I'm going to play a warrior-like character who has associations with the town guard.
Right.
Because there's rumour of some nefarious deeds going on here, and we've learnt from inquiries so far that the manor is quite well fortified. I'm going to try a more indirect approach.
Okay.
And essentially do a shakedown on some of the household personnel coming and going from the location.
The servants, right?
Yeah, the servants, and see whether we can find out a little bit more information on the location itself and or some of their knowledge of what's going on inside.
So what sort of skill does that look like? Coercion?
I'm going to... Well, that's an interesting point, because there's a couple of different ways I could do that. I could take a more indirect approach and, let's say, confront someone on the street and shake them down in a more literal terms, or I could perhaps arrest someone on some other charges,
right,
or on the pretense of charges, and bring them in for formal interrogation. So I guess there's a couple of different ways that I could approach this. Let me think. Let's try a more formal approach.
Okay.
Of bringing them in for interrogation around an accused theft.
Okay.
Associated with a local merchant.
Radio.
Yeah.
So what sort of skill are you going to be using for that?
What skill would I use for that?
I'm thinking coercion is probably the best option.
Really?
Maybe some leadership if you're wanting to order the person because you're obviously a warrior.
I think we'll go for coercion because it's more about me interrogating them and ask him a lot of questions about coming and goings under the pretense of what's going on and their relationship. Back to the location, because we need to get in there somehow.
Yep.
And at the moment, we're struggling to find a way to do that. So I think our advantage here would be to try and get some successes forward to give us a little bit more leverage.
Sure.
For our goal.
Well, look, obviously the people who work at the premises are obviously fearful for revealing any sort of information. But they're not necessarily the greatest willed people. So I'm just thinking 2 purple dice. So that's an average check with 1 setback.
With a setback. 3 small dice. Sorry, my arm's not long enough. Okay, let's see what we can do. Wow. So what have we got there? So I've got 2 successes. And sorry, that's a threat and 1 threat.
Right. Okay. So you've probably had to push a little bit harder than normal, which is not necessarily sitting on your heart very well. So you can take a point of strain.
Yeah, that seems fair. I mean, it is concocted charges after all.
Yes. Which is kind of against the nature of what your character is doing.
It is, but we're trying to leverage off a bit of personal interest.
That is true. So that was 2 successes.
2 successes.
Nice. Very good.
So hey, we've all 3 gone at this point, so it's kind of a new round, so to speak. Can I go first this time, guys? I have an idea.
Sure.
Okay. Well, based on the reconnaissance you just did, and you've identified a weak point in the guard patrols around a certain area, and also based on the earlier failure, but the triumph to identify sort of that subterranean sewage passage, my scholar, with his diminutive gnome stature, would definitely like to start digging right into that at the appropriate time, grabbing that triumph to upgrade my mechanics check that I'd like to make to try and break my way through any type of grating or bars and drill our way sort of into this compound.
That sounds like a perfectly good idea.
Sounds excellent. However, I did roll a threat in that check we didn't use. So maybe the sewer itself is quite
unpleasant.
Unpleasant. So there's a setback.
It would be for a setback, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah. There's some level of it smells like rotted flesh.
Oh, no.
So
something unnatural about the sewer.
This sewer stinks.
What? Like every other sewer, it doesn't stink. But anyway,
send in the gnome.
So what would the rest of my difficulty?
So look, the difficulty for this, because it's sort of out of the way, I'm just going to make this an easy check. So this is just going to be 1 purple die, but there is a setback.
Okay, so I got 1 purple, 1 black, and with my upgraded pool, thanks to that triumph that's now off the table, I got 3 yellows. Oh, mama. That's what I'm talking about. Gentlemen, I have 3 successes.
Ooh.
2 threat.
Ooh.
And a triumph.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, so you've managed to gain entry into the sewers. However, there's a lot of rats and decay and whatever else which is down here.
And a smell that just won't wash off.
And a smell that just won't wash off at all. So each of you can take 2 strain.
Ooh.
Okay.
All right. And for my triumph, oh man, I don't want to. Do I have to decide right now? I'd kind of like to leave it on the table for the challenge. I definitely think maybe we discovered something that's going to make the next check a lot easier in terms of fully upgrading it. Maybe something special to help out.
I would certainly allow that.
Okay, so I'm going to leave that triumph on the table for a future upgrade.
Cool.
Okay.
And I don't know. Or do you guys think I should maybe add some extra successes to our total? What's our total at?
We're at 8 successes.
8 successes from 15. So it's still a little while to go.
Still a little while to go. Yeah.
Well,
I'll ask the party's opinion. What do you guys think?
Well, it's going to be good demonstration to the listeners of using the triumph for the extra successes. And I'm rolling soon too, so I won't add any successes. So
That's a good point. You know, the sewage stinks. I'm not happy. Yeah. What is it worth, Hooly? Can we add an extra 2 successes?
Look, I would allow 2 successes.
I'll
Definitely
take us
for
to
that.
10 then. 10 successes.
All right, take it to 10. Boom.
So we've used the tunnel to basically get good access. Maybe we've moved under the mansion at this point.
Yep.
Are we all going together? You've done your warrior. Mick has done his his interrogations.
Yeah.
Now I'm picturing Ward jumped down into the sewer and we're sneaking through.
Well, that's what I understood in respect to all of us taking 2 strain.
Sweet. Just paint that picture in my head.
Yep.
So we've gauged with that triumph that we're deep under the mansion now. This sewer's gone exactly where we wanted it to go.
I'd even go so far as to say we're deep in the poo.
Exactly. However, there is a hitch. We find an exit point in the sewers, but obviously the security is aware of the sewer and they've bolted a secure latch into the access way into the mansion from the sewers. There's a big, thick padlock.
Right.
However, me being a rogue and having this handy set of thieves' tools,
tools for the job.
Exactly. I am going to pick the lock and try and gain this access.
Right. Well, it's a pretty big, hard lock. So I reckon it's going to be 3 purple dice.
Your hands are a bit slippery too.
And look, it is a little bit slippery and whatever else down here. So you can have a setback die as well.
Okay, but I have the right tools for the job.
You do have the right tools for the job. And you're a rogue. Perhaps you also have...
I think I've got a knack for it.
I reckon you would have had a knack for it. Absolutely.
For sure. All right. That's something I'll do. All right, let's go. Okay, yep, that's a failure.
Welcome to Michael's roll.
With 1 threat.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
the lock, I go to try and pick it.
Yes.
But it's that corroded and that the mechanism itself, I can't even get the thieves' tools into the lock. Maybe with the threat, it actually damages my thieves' tools.
Yes, it damages them 1 level. Absolutely.
You should have used my upgrade, man.
I should have, but I still would have failed. So that is another failure, thanks to me.
Right. So that's 2 failures.
Are we running 3 failures, Hooly, or
3 failures?
More?
Yep, 3 failures.
So I guess as the warrior in the party, given that finesse has failed to do the job, that perhaps some brute force is required here,
right,
to try and leverage this grate open in some way, or if the lock is. I don't know. Have we got story points to spend? Because the lock, given its poor condition, might be a little corroded. That with the right application of force, might actually be able to snap it open.
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. So you can upgrade that check, most certainly.
Can I make a suggestion on this check?
Sure.
Maybe if he rolls 3 threat or a despair, his bashing of the lock is someone hears it.
Yes, I would definitely suggest that. In fact, so that we can make that a reality, I think I'm going to flip the story point, and so you can upgrade the purple die to a red. So the difficulty is just going to be 2 purples normally. So that in this case, it's going to be a purple and a red.
Okay,
you got this.
I've got this.
Now, do you want to use? Now,
it's all up to you.
Do you want to use? Do you also want to use Chris's upgrade?
No, Chris.
Well, I say I should. I remember I chose not to.
That's right. Yes.
That's why I was saying. Wait, should have done the upgrade.
Well, no. In a way, your upgrade made my failure into success.
That's right. Because we got
good way to think about it.
Yeah, we got 2 successes out of it, so it's still helped either
Absolutely.
way. Yeah.
So
all right. So it's all on me.
So
it's all on you.
Be quiet when you're bashing that metallic object. Thanks.
All right.
Did you put the silencer on your sword?
Okay, on a count of 3, you 2 just go.
Wait.
What?
You already flipped the story point, haven't you?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, I did.
So say a thunderstorm has rolled in,
right,
and you time the bangs to the.
Oh, see, that's advantage territory.
It is.
That's advantage territory.
That's really clever. But no, you're too slow.
I know. That's the story of my life.
Anyway, here goes nothing.
How can I roll like that?
I don't know. I failed.
Oh,
you rolled exactly like me.
So yeah, 1 success, 1 failure. So they cancel out, and I've got an advantage.
A single advantage.
Single advantage on my roll.
What does that look like?
Mostly, it looks a lot like my disappointment.
So at this point, we failed the skill challenge.
We have, absolutely.
So maybe we've, I don't know, maybe like as a suggestion, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a little much for one advantage, but we can, we've made a lot of noise. We can hear guard patrols, heavy boots rushing to our locations. That advantage gives us time to get our narrow asses back down the sewer tunnel.
Yep, absolutely.
And now they're aware that someone was trying to break in.
Yep.
To that sewer tunnel,
and so they'll fortify their defenses.
They completely just block that sewer tunnel up, so that is now not even an option for us.
Absolutely,
it was the exhaust port in their Death Star, and they discovered it before we could put a torpedo down it.
Exactly right. So so that's kind of you've failed to gain entry into the premises, and perhaps that the mayor, who happens to be an evil wizard, that instead he decides to send out his own team to deal with these people who were last seen running away from the sewer.
Well, maybe that's in itself a new skill challenge. This skill challenge is us avoiding his security.
Exactly.
Because they may not necessarily know who we are because we did get out before they saw us. They know someone was trying to get in.
So spies and agents are sweeping the street.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that itself would be a great skill
trying
challenge.
to identify who we are.
God, we were so close.
So close. It's all your fault, Mick. Like, GM
No, exactly. It was mixed fun.
Damn it.
When have you started talking in third person?
I fell right into that trap.
But so that's pretty much a skill challenge. And so, the difficulty in my mind, I was setting as 2 purples and 1 setback. And I modified things as I was going, as I was listening to what was actually being said, whether it was a good idea, I reduced the difficulty. If it was something that was a little bit more complex, would increase. So running your difficulty, if you've never run a skill challenge before, I would always recommend just trying to stick to the 1 difficulty for all of the checks that, as Chris mentioned, sort of at the start of the show. Or the start of the topic, that you would set a number of skills. So for that, it might be skullduggery, it might be stealth, it may be
they're usually fairly self-explanatory to the situation that you're in.
Absolutely.
Which is like, obviously in this case, if one of us decided to, enact charm whilst in the sewer, probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless the player's very, very creative.
Yeah.
And that's when the GM would go, well, okay, you're trying to charm the rats to help you break the lock, so that's going to be 5 purple dice. So,
or it's montage time, and we say,
exactly.
Before we left yesterday, I charmed the hell out of the cleaning lady and got her a little wasted, and she left a key down here for us or something like
or she unlocked it for us or something like that.
Or she left it unlocked, something to that effect.
That's a perfect example of a non-linear montage thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, the thing which threw me in that scenario were 2 things. One was from Mick, where we talked about coercing some of the hired help, and the other one was Chris's suggestion, which was to use the magic skill to try to track down and look for residual magic that has been left behind. So they're the sorts of things that, normally don't be so rigid that you have to stick to the 4 skills or 6 skills that you've decided upon for your skill challenge. Just relax and run with whatever the players are suggesting, and you'll get a feel for difficulties. And I know that, as you mentioned before, Chris, you guys have done a show on it. We've done a show on it. We're talking about setting difficulties and how that works, and you'll get a feel for it. And
there's also something worth mentioning too. In that brief little moment we had where we basically just were playing characters we made up in 2 seconds, each of our skill challenges and the options we took painted very vivid pictures of those characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
GM Mick's characters, I pictured immediately a very stoic guard type who maybe was once an ex-enforcer of some variety, who's now using his past career's knowledge and know-how to, interrogate people because they're assuming he's someone of authority.
That's right.
My character is quite clearly, your stereotypical shady rogue type who lives in the streets. GM Chris's character, I pictured a very smart engineering type character who isn't afraid to get his hands dirty, but at the same time can sit back and do a very methodical scan. I use the word scan of a building for residual magical effects. So we've got 3 very unique characters described to us and the audience via just skill challenges. Of no background discussed with the characters whatsoever, but immediately painted a picture for the characters for us, the GM, and everyone else at the table.
And that'll be a lot easier when done in a live environment because you've spent the time to create your character. You've got an idea of who they are. You've probably played a few sessions, and therefore the personality's formed around how that character interacts with the world setting and the other people. So all of that is going to drive your narrative of how you would approach these skill challenges.
Absolutely.
And if you're comfortable with a montage where you can go back and forth in time, don't be afraid to start things in media res. Before the show, we were talking about one of my RPG heroes is a designer named John Harper, and he successfully kickstarted a very popular role-playing game called Blades in the Dark, where it's all rogues all the time. The group are thieves. That's what they are. But any encounter they go into, and this is in the rules, it always starts in media res. Always. You are always in the shit. Always. That's how you start. And then at that point, every skill check you make, everything you do is, okay, well, before we started, I did this. Okay? And it's almost, flashing back Ocean's 11 style to planning at the table, basically. And if you fail, that just means that, okay, you put a plan into motion, but it failed horribly. Okay? Your preparation didn't work. Talk to me about how that happened. So, I mean, don't be afraid to start in media res. The other kind of final thing I'd like to note is to talk a little bit more about the challenge level that you have. So, Hooly, you set this up for 12 total successes before 3 failed checks, right?
Absolutely.
And we kind of glossed over this a little bit, but, your light levels are typically going to be, 10 to 15 successes. Medium to hard is going to be, 15-ish. And tough is going to be 20 or higher total successes. Don't be afraid to go that route, especially if you've got a very experienced party with the Dragon Squadron with 1,000 XP under their belt. They're going to be hitting 5 and 6 successes on a roll, like it's nothing. You need to get into the 20 successes tally at that point to make it a meaningful challenge. But the other side of the coin is the number of failed checks. This equates to, it's almost like 2 levels of difficulty you have to deal with. It's not just how hard is it going to be to succeed, how easy is it going to be to fail. And that is also something to consider. And that should also be directly related to the hostility of the scene, the perceived hostility. But also there's a time limit associated with that. If you have 3 failed checks and you're done, that's like, on average, that's like 2 rounds of rolling, if that. Okay? On average. If you want it to last longer, make it 5 failed checks. Okay.
So
and if you got a beginner group, especially, go for that.
So your failed checks are kind of your downside in that circumstance, like the margin of error that you have to play with in what you're doing in your.
Well, the one we just run,
skill challenge.
The one we just exampled, then having the 3, because at a low level, it should be around 5 failed checks, but immediately at that level, 3 fails. A failure is up your sleeve is your hard limit. Immediately paints a picture of how dangerous this mayor is. And
he's
how
dangerous, well fortified, the resources he has at his disposal.
Absolutely. And it also amps up the tension at the table as well, because people are going, what are we going to do now? And they start sort of talking about ideas about what they can do. People start throwing in suggestions and whatever else. And so you're encouraging that level of engagement at the table between the players. Which is what you're ultimately after, is so that you don't have the people sitting in the background just waiting to roll dice. They're involved in the story. They're making suggestions, even if it's for other people.
I've never seen players get as engaged as I see them with the skill challenge, especially if you've got that high risk where you've got low number of failures to fail. It's like, I mean, God, everyone at the table's on the edge of their seat. Like, okay, we cannot fail this check. We cannot fail this check. Everyone's engaged at that point. They're all contributing, making suggestions, adding to the narrative. It's good play.
If you really wanted to add a scary death clock to these, you could have the failed threshold tick down by 1 every round.
Oh,
So you automatically lose one threshold every round. So you have to try and meet the successes before the death clock ticks down.
Wow.
And that perfect...
or a hybrid. There's an alternate suggestion too, is that you do away with failed checks, period, as the threshold, and just say, guys, you got 3 rounds.
Yep.
Yeah, they can do it too.
Yep.
Or you got 4 rounds. That's it. And each round, everybody has to make a check, and that's all you got. That's the time limit.
Perfect on-screen example of that. The Death Star about to shoot Yavin base.
Yes.
It's swinging around Yavin.
Yep.
And seconds before it can fire at Yavin 4. And Luke manages to blow up, literally with the last roll in the last round and destroys the Death Star.
Absolutely. One
more failure at that, because that round count or the death clock,
yep,
it's all over GG.
Because I know that there's a lot of people, and I know that we'll cover this in another episode as well, but some people are intimidated by vehicle combat. But there are still going to be players that are investing in those sorts of skills. So why not give them the opportunity to be able to use that without having to dive into vehicle combat, but just in a more narrative sense? I think that's a great idea for those who are intimidated by that. One final thought that I just want to raise as far as one particular pitfall is the assist action. Because I think that it's easy to have players at the table go, okay, well, we're going to offer some level of assistance. So if you've got 5 players at the table, you might have one player who's got a good idea of what he wants to do, and the other 4 people are just going to sit back and going to go, well, we're going to provide some booster and whatever else.
They're not playing the spirit of the game.
No,
though,
exactly.
Well, no, you can. I'm glad you brought this up. I've done this. You can roll with it, but there's a consequence.
Yep.
If you want to spend your turn to not contribute to the skill challenge and instead assist, that's your choice, and it may be a wise choice, but that means you have a failure to the total.
That's a good way of doing it.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
And that's how you do it. And I've presented that to parties, and it's been an actual, at that point, conscious decision where it's been like, okay, we are 3 successes away from completing this, 5 failures to defeat it. We have 3 failures now. Okay. And I've had a player say, and actually it was a Star Wars game, and they were playing a drawl, which is a weird species that if you use the Star Wars equivalent of the assist action, you grant 2 boost dice instead of 1. And he said, you know what? I'm going to take the failure and bring us to 4 because I want to give our next player 2 boost dice because it was a computer's check and they had a stupid high pool anyway. And it's like, I want to give them the extra successes because we're so close. All right. And that was actually a very narratively powerful moment for them. It was this character letting things go to hell in order to help somebody else with the slim hope that their help would push them to victory.
Yep.
And with having that, that adding that you will have a failure to it makes it so you just can't spam that option over and over again.
Exactly. Right.
Exactly.
You can do it a finite number of times, and it makes that option a tough choice to make. And that's the most important thing here, is making those tough choices.
Yep.
Which is a very interesting way of doing it. I like that. Also had one more thing.
Yes.
And it's always been a pet peeve of mine in the narrative dice system ever since I started playing this game, from Star Wars and onwards, is players in certain groups will roll 10 advantages. That's an extreme example, but it can happen.
Yep.
I've seen it happen.
Yes.
And they go, well, I'm just going to give 10 advantages to the next person, then 10 boosts to the next person who makes a dice roll.
Yep.
Raw technically can do it, but as a player, I cannot stand it.
No.
I think it's gamey is all hell, and in very rare circumstances can you narratively describe that.
Yeah.
So as a GM, you might want to put a soft limit on that, because players may abuse it.
Yep.
Have it, maybe you can only pass 3 boosts to the next active player or something like that.
Yeah.
Just so it stops this, because if you allow it to happen, you can snowball, and just the momentum builds, and the players will just end up with a massive amount of boost dice, because the boost dice will then feed extra advantages, and it just goes on from there. So you do need to be cautious of that.
Yep.
And by raw, players can technically do it, but GM discretion.
I really like that idea that you set that that limit, that the most you can give a player is 3 boost die. But if they've got some stupid amount of advantages, why not go to the next extent and say, okay, so if you get 3 advantages or 4 advantages, that you can upgrade the check. That's outside of the rules and what's suggested, but ultimately we're not playing for sheep stations.
Well, you're already playing a house rule if you're doing skill challenges.
That's
anyway,
right.
So you might as well then make up more house rules to make it better.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Because you're all about having fun at the table.
That's it.
And, as soon as you're putting limits on things, on what players can do, they start going, well, I'm not necessarily having as much fun. So the exercises, just be careful. But, good suggestion. Any final thoughts?
I got to give props to the first time I ever encountered the concept of a skill challenge in an RPG as we know it. And it was created back in the D20 Saga Edition days by the brilliant and amazing GM Brev.
Right.
With his infamous Pants Off, Dance Off challenge.
Okay, you're going to have to explain that.
Now, it's very different from what was eventually codified in the rule set. In the sense that it wasn't freeform narrative. He had it listed out. Each round, everyone had to make a very specific skill check. Okay, but he recorded the successes and failures and all that, and it was literally part of a dance competition to win the attention of a flirtatious hut. And
God, you wouldn't want to roll any despairs, would you?
And I absolutely love that. If it was two PCs could choose to dance together, and in which case every round one of them would lead, which means they would be the one making the roll. The other one could provide assistance, right? And first check was like athletics. Second check was acrobatics. Resilience was brought in, and then when the dance got down and dirty, he called for a ride check. Yeah, so
that's disturbing.
It is because of GM Brev that I was like, "Wow, this has legs. This needs to be. No pun intended. This needs to be something bigger." Yeah. And that was almost 10 years ago. So, wow. Thanks, Brev.
Classic Brev.
So great discussion. I think that if you haven't used skill challenges in your games, they are probably one of the best things that I've come across. And clearly, from what we've discussed today, I think everybody agrees with me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to throw down a challenge on skill challenges.
Yes.
For people out there.
Right.
I would like you to run your next session without combat.
Wow.
At all.
Yep.
Or even do a whole adventure without combat. Doesn't have to be a long adventure.
Yep.
And just skill challenges.
Interesting.
Share your experiences on the Facebook page.
That's a great idea.
Because I think the more, because it's one of those topics that, whilst you can have a framework like GM Chris has talked about, and he has his, his set challenges and the core skills that go with it, there is so much fluidity in that based on how players tend to approach that. And I think the more examples people have, the more ideas that they'll be able to form in their own mind, and that'll allow them to either create their own list of challenges and core skills that works for them, or conversely, if you're like me and somewhat lazy, just make it up as you go. Yeah. It'll be easier for you to do that because you'll have more frames of reference to draw back on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's my challenge to everyone.
And I also think if you're doing skill challenges for the first time, don't go too huge.
No.
Start something minor and see how your players around the table adapt to it, let them grow. Because if it's new to everyone at the table, it's going to be a little bit shaky. And encourage players to use skills that may not necessarily be in their normal comfort zone. Yeah. Because that can lead to some interesting character development as well.
And I think that's the small, look for small examples where you can apply it rather than saying, okay, we'll make a singular skill roll to resolve that outcome. If you've got small examples that you can use it for, then perhaps turn it into a skill challenge and play with it that way.
It could be as simple as, tracking down a certain item in a bazaar somewhere. There's no threat of anyone being murdered or killed, but if you ultimately fail, you just don't track down that item. There is rules for that. You can just use negotiation to find that one item by raw. But if you make an interesting skill challenge,
that's right.
It gives players a easy, non-threatening playground to test the skill challenges in. And the combat monkeys can't just crack out their swords and axes and cannons and blow apart the crowd of people in the bazaar because they're looking for a hat. So it sort of normalizes it almost. So it's interesting.
Man, I need to introduce you to my players.
But what's interesting, just on that because one of my biggest complaints that I get from players when they go and try to find stuff in that they want to buy is that you have to make a check, and if you fail it, it's just not there. And, it's sort of like, well, I just wanted to buy this one thing because that would have made my character feel a little bit cooler. And it came down to one skill check. That's a bit rough. So using it in a skill challenge, that's brilliant. Yeah. That's really, really good.
Because that could even feed into what's happening with the narrative of your adventure across the board, because it might be you need to score so many successes to obtain this item, but you don't succeed in your first attempt, but you gain a lead that you have to travel to some other location because there's a rumour you may be able to source it from there.
Use it as an adventure hook.
That's right.
That's brilliant.
Exactly. You have it like the players in the middle of hunting down this item from the market shop. It's a mundane thing. One of them roll a despair. They're not looking where they're going. They're around the corner, bump into the bounty hunter that's been tracking them down for the last 2 weeks. And all of a sudden that simple job of finding an item turns into a plot hook, and your adventure just spikes from there.
Spirals, yeah, absolutely. So, some great stories. We could rabbit on like this for hours, I think, about skill challenges and options. So, as Mick suggested, definitely let us know on Facebook or any of our social medias about that. And also, if you have a question that you would like answered or a show topic you'd like us to discuss, let us know. Facebook, Twitter, email. We've certainly got a large number of ways that people can get that information there. They could also go to our Facebook page. Our website at www.thedicepoolepodcast.com. Well, that was a really good discussion. Yeah. Have we got some time for maybe some questions?
I do. I'm here.
I got time.
Right, cool. And what would we call that topic?
Question time.
Question time.
I think you've made that suggestion a number of times.
Is it? I like it. It's a good one.
Question time.
Self-explanatory.
Someone wanted to call it behind the screens, but I wasn't into it.
Behind the screens.
And welcome to Behind the Screens, the segment where we will answer your games and rules questions regarding the Genesis role-playing game. And tonight we've got a couple of juicy questions. So who's our first question from tonight? Chris, as our guest of honour, would you like to start us off?
Ooh, absolutely. Well, our first question tonight on Messages from the Edge. I'm sorry, that's the wrong show.
That's a great name. Let's call it that.
Our first question is from GM Archellus, or maybe it's Arkellis, or maybe RK, I don't know. GM Archellus asks via email, "Greetings, GMs from Down Under. I am not from Down Under."
He's left you out, Chris.
Wow.
I feel hurt, mildly.
Put on your best Australian accent and continue on.
Oh, do it. Do it.
He does do it.
My God, it is Thursday already. Okay. Greetings, GMs from Down Under. Hope you can help me with a small conundrum about the Tier 5 Master talent. My campaign Season 1 is coming to a close, and I was discussing with Season 2 with my players. Topic of the Master talent came up, and most of the players wanted to buy this for the Divine skill. I think it is a wonderful talent, but we had a talk and wondered if this talent could be potentially overpowered when used with magic skills. It does have a strain cost, but lowering the difficulty by 2 on a magic check just seems too good. I can understand the balance for something like medicine or any other skill to some degree, even combat skills, since the minimum difficulty will always be 1 and still be affected by upgrades like Adversary. I understand it's a Tier 5 talent, and it's supposed to be powerful, but my gut feeling is it's just OP. We had a good discussion in the play group, but are interested in hearing your thoughts on this talent in combination with the magic skills. Cheers, and thanks in advance.
Well, I can open this up. Only because I have experimented with it in a backwards sort of way. In the homebrew game that I'm a part of, we have a talent called Blessed. It's a Tier 1 or Tier 2 talent, which is essentially this. It's like a supers sort of game, so it was to give the characters a bit of a superpower ability. Right. You can apply it to any skill though, just like Master. Initially we had it applied to magic, and it was very, very powerful. Magic became, unbeatable almost with it at an early level. Yep. So we tweaked it a little bit and changed it. But I agree, it is powerful. I can see where the questioner has a little bit of somewhat concerned about it because, especially if a whole group of players are doing it, it can become very dominating at the board. That's my 2 cents anyway. My suggestion is if all the players agree with it, just introduce the story point cost to it. You have to flip a story point to do it, and off you go. But you do fall into a bit of a trap then of all your story points being saved for this one thing.
Yeah.
So it's tough, but that's. I'm not overly familiar with Magic in long-term games, so I can't say a whole lot else. But that's my 2 cents.
Look, the interesting thing is that, as the talent says, is that you spend 2 strain and you can reduce the difficulty of the check by 2. It's not downgrading the check, it is actually reducing the difficulty.
Which is huge.
But we have to remember a couple of things. First thing is the order that the process occurs as far as upgrades and downgrades and whatever else. The decreasing of the difficulty occurs first. So as he points out, that things like adversary, dodge, things like that are affected if we're talking about combat skills and whatever else. But when it comes to Magic, if it's an attack skill, same sort of process. You're still targeting someone. Where it changes is where you're not targeting someone. So yes, Magic still has a strain cost of 2 for casting the spell at the end, but it also has this, if you are using the talent, that you're taking more strain costs. So it is a bit of a strain suck. The interesting thing is that obviously there is a similar talent in Star Wars where it's a once per session thing.
That's another way of balancing it as well.
Which is another way
ding,
of
ding,
balancing.
ding.
So, that's what I would recommend if it is becoming a problem at the table, is to basically change it from having a strain cost to once per session.
Yeah. But be sure to file off the strain cost if you do that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So
and obviously it sounds like he has a fairly mature group of players because they've all discussed this, and so they're obviously all very aware that this could be an issue.
Yeah.
So it sounds like he won't have too much an issue changing or house ruling this particular talent.
Yep.
But if you are a GM who hasn't discussed this with the group, or the group isn't comfortable with the change or isn't expecting a change, make sure they know about it before they invest the XP, because nothing worse than being in that situation where you're a player and you invest all that XP in a tier 5 talent than having the rug pulled out from beneath your feet. So make sure everyone at the table is comfortable or at least aware of that particular change, because it is a big change. If you make it once per session, you may not even buy it. Then I would probably consider it.
I guess that's a consideration of it's as a talent, its relative power in relation to other tier 5 talents that you might obtain. Because then change it in that way may really, in some respects, kind of bump the tier of that talent down.
Potentially, yeah.
That's possible. Because if you look at it in the Star Wars RPG, a lot of the time it is a tier 5, but sometimes it's tier 4. And, it just depends, because obviously they do talents a little bit differently as far as the cost and how to get there.
If you find it as a tier 4, though, it's never a straight shot to
No,
get
it's
there.
not. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's convoluted as all get out to get there.
But the XP cost to get to a tier 5, assuming you're going in a straight line in a Star Wars skill tree, is still a lot cheaper
absolutely.
than a tier 5 in Genesis.
Yep.
So you may, if you do change this to once per session, maybe drop it to tier 4 if you feel it's a little bit too...
Yeah,
because I guess it's the cost versus reward, isn't it?
Exactly. It's still very good. It definitely makes it it's a talent you're gonna bank until you really need to pop it, essentially.
And remember, it is only for one skill, so there are some limiters there as well. But
it's very powerful on Magic, because Magic, unlike other skills, you can chuck on all these extra difficulty die to allow you to do all this other awesome stuff. It's the only skill set in the game which has that unique attribute. So that's why this particular talent is very powerful in the hands of Magic. And that's obviously the concern of the talent, is why we've got the question.
I mean, there is a reason why that knack for it can't be used
on combat stuff
and Magic skills. So, hey, look, there would be nothing wrong with actually saying the same sort of thing.
Yeah, just restrict
that it can't be used in combat or magic skills. Mm-hmm. That's another option.
Which maybe over penalises combat characters a little bit because it's not as potent on those characters because as Akela said, the difficulty to die on those is already minimised to 1 anyway.
Yep.
So if you're at short range, you're not getting anything from the talent at all. But
and can be impacted from other sources as well.
Exactly,
like the adversary talent, as he's pointed out.
That's very true as well.
Yep.
I don't know.
Absolutely.
I think like it takes 175 XP to get this talent.
That's also
true. That's assuming that you throw none of your earned XP into anything but talent progression. Okay?
That's true.
Yep.
And if you do, well, your skill ranks are going to be pretty low, which means, you're not going to be going OP with this anyway.
Yep.
So you're talking, it's going to take you a while to get this. And let's also talk about the fact that even attempting to cast a spell costs 2 strain.
Yep.
So you're talking about a 4 strain pop just to use this talent, okay, on a magic skill. And as is clearly delineated in the magic system, if you get into this, if you got to play, if you want to run this raw, GM. If you want to run this raw and you're worried about it being OP, you better be spending every threat that comes up for massive strain cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
One threat can lead to 2 additional strain in magic. Okay, it's that much harsher. So the guy rolls. And I'm sorry, unless his strain threshold's insane, the guy rolls 2 or 3 threat. He could go unconscious from using this.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's viable.
And that may sound like hitting them where it hurts, but at the same time, if the talent's that powerful and it's really is wrecking your game as a GM, then take that advice and throw some strain damage out there.
Yep. Do that once or twice, and they'll think carefully about when they apply it.
Yep.
And as you said before, I think that it can't be stated enough. Make sure you're discussing these issues with your players. If it is becoming a problem, I think we discussed this way back in episode 2 when we were talking about session 0. There is nothing wrong with stopping play for, in the middle of a campaign and just having a session 0 to see how everybody's going with the rules that are being used, talents and whatever else to see whether there's, you can identify the problems before they become a major thing. So,
well, I think also underlining problem that Arkelos might have. It's by reading his question. He says most of the players are taking this for the divine. So most of his players are all rocking around the divine magic spell, a skill. So one character having this talent in the party isn't a big deal, and it's probably worth its XP, 100% worth its XP. But when you have 4 out of your 5 players rocking it, I could potentially see his concern.
Yeah, absolutely.
But why do that many characters have
the divine
this one set of skills? So it sounds like a fairly unique situation that he's in as well.
Yep.
But that's, making a judgment call without actually seeing his game or his party makeup or anything like that. So it's interesting.
I can just tell you from my judgment, guys, I've nerfed Master in my games. It cannot apply to combat skills or magic skills.
There you go.
Yep.
So, I treat it like knack for it. It's basically, I almost treat Master like improved knack for it.
Yep.
Well, those two combined is pretty potent. It means you can be really good at one skill set.
And I think a balancing point so that the mages and the combat wombats don't necessarily feel that they're being gypped is to look at creating a talent which is sort of similar but not necessarily as OP. So whether that be, once a session you can do that. Specifically for those skills that are making it a little bit broken.
If you have a magic user who feels like they're getting gypped because of you nerfing this talent, you need to have them listen to our magic episodes that we did on this podcast and understand how badass magic is.
Absolutely. Very good. So our next question, it's a little bit of a long one and comes from Nathan Pence, who asks via Facebook Messenger. First off, big fan of the show. Thanks. I look forward to each and every episode and love that your cast always has multiple perspectives on your various topics. Even if it's a topic I think I know all about, I find myself getting fresh ideas from each and every episode. Thank you for doing what you do and keep up the good work.
Well, thank you, Nathan.
Oh, thanks, dude. Right, you've buttered us up, so let's answer the question.
Consider me buttered.
Now, on to my question. Can't just be all sunshine and lollipops. I have a question about exposure and torture. I run a game set in a fantasy Venice-esque city, a la...
Lies of Loch Lamora.
Right.
I've read the book.
Oh, you've read the book? Okay.
Excellent book.
Great book.
Yes.
Okay.
A great book. Sequel, not so much.
I've read the sequel. I've read the sequel.
I didn't enjoy it as much, but I really enjoyed Lies of Lochmore.
The bag with the broken glass is still one of my most favourite descriptions of a death sentence in any book.
Wow.
Yeah. But that's for another topic.
And, so continuing on. And my group is playing a family of thieves. They recently ran afoul of the powers that be, and one of them has to serve 8 days hanging by the wrist from a canal bridge. The character in question is a tough guy. I want the ordeal to be scary but survivable, and I want them to have to roll dice so that there is an element of chance to surviving the sentence. 8 days without food, water, or shelter from the elements is fatal for most. Any thoughts on how you'd strike a balance between scary and lethal? It's an odd situation for sure, but one that could turn into a real character gold when the PC gets known citywide for surviving the nigh impossible and becomes a named man, 8th day, or something. Any help would be appreciated. Thanks for taking the time to read this novel-length question.
I think I have the answer for him.
Okay,
and
go.
This brings in fear and psychology rules and all those related to it. Have him; he's never going to die.
Yep.
Right? They get that. No, don't necessarily tell your player that, but you as a GM, you know that under the hood.
Yep.
That this character won't die. Have them make a resilience check or even a willpower check or both. If he fails his resilience check, he could take strain, criticals, wounds, etc. Even lower his wound threshold for a few weeks or something like that, depending on how badly he rolls that check.
Yep.
But the most important check here is going to be the willpower, and set that appropriately difficult. Heck, even make it a skill challenge every day. Every
challenge.
8
checks he has to
Exactly
make.
what I was
going to
say.
Like that. Yep, exactly like that. However, depending on how well he succeeds or how badly he fails, if he fails really badly, yeah, sure, he survived it, but just shame his mental state hasn't survived all that well. So have him mentally broken, and that's going to add some layers of really cool character roleplay elements for that dude. Yeah, sure, he survived 8 days hanging from the bridge, but now he's pretty well unhinged, and he may recover from that in time, or he may not. But it gives the character some interesting roleplay elements, and that's feeding off a failure. And even if he succeeds that willpower check, he still could get mental feedback from it, residual negatives from that.
Yep.
And he could be fearful and etc. for a short period of time, and that comes from your threats on a successful check. But I think ultimately the worst case scenario, this guy will survive it, but his mind might not. That's how I would play it anyway. Because if you make a chance of dying, he rolls badly, his character dies, it's going to be a feel-bad moment for you as the GM and the player, because, I know very well how the dice can roll sometimes, even if you've got the best stats in the world.
Yeah.
So that's how I'd approach it.
Dude,
Good
this
suggestion.
is a straight-up skill challenge for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like all the way. And honestly, now the GM may not want to do this if he wants this to be a character-centric moment, but you could bring the party in.
Yeah.
Okay. His family's worried about him. Okay. So core skills for him are going to be things like resilience, athletics, discipline, cool. Okay. But God, maybe they try and, how do you survive hanging for 8 days? Maybe somebody uses some skullduggery or some stealth to sneak him some water, or a morsel of food. Okay.
Vinegar on a spear tip. Vinegar on a spear tip.
Something as simple as using social skills to sway the emotional state and feedback and support of the onlookers who are watching this guy hang, so that you're manipulating the crowd to shout him words of encouragement. Can be very meaningful. But whether it's a solo skill challenge, dude, this is or a party skill challenge, I really have to agree with the suggestion of failure. I don't think he should die from it, but if he comes out of this badly, you need to take a look at that character's motivation, and it depends very strongly on how deeply the party plays to their motivations.
Yep.
But at the very least, he could have his fear completely shift at this point, or even develop a new flaw, or even modify what his desire or strength is as a result.
There's so much you can do with that, which is great. And going by what you just said, Chris, you could easily have this as a party skill challenge.
Yep.
It could be them, doing skullduggery or whatnot to give this guy food, but also it could be a skill challenge for them on a psychological level to see how well they cope with seeing their friend and colleague hanging for 8 days. If they start failing, they could all start having psychological damage from it as well. Because have seen a loved one, as Nathan said, this is all a family of thieves.
Yep.
Seeing a loved one hang for that long, you're not going to walk away from that to full quid. You're going to be pretty shaken up. So that in itself could be could just be the skill challenge. Nothing more to that. The players have no way of helping them out physically. All they can do is sit back and watch, and the skill challenge determines how well they cope with that.
Yeah.
What if you broaden this into a larger social perspective? This is a gang of thieves. They're trying to gain influence, most likely in the city, and how people view them as this family of thieves matters. If this guy fails, what does that mean? Okay, if you don't necessarily kill him, but maybe that failure of this skill challenge represents him screaming like a baby while he's hanging there, calling to the gods for help, begging for mercy, and basically coming off not looking like a tough guy. And failure could result in an entire shift of how the city they're in views him or views the entire gang in terms of their strength or weakness.
Or conversely, for the family, they may be able to garner support from the general population against the rulers there because of the cruel and unusual punishment that's been made, and actually shift the political landscape within the city.
It's all a matter of how they spin it.
Because there was I can't remember the name of the movie, but there was a scene where, the typical crowd, it was where somebody was getting hung or strung in the quarter or something like that.
Braveheart.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. And where that everybody's going, yeah, kill him. And as they're doing more damage to him, he's not screaming. And all of a sudden, the crowd is basically going, oh, just make it stop. And so the crowd basically goes against the people who are instigating the torture. That's great storytelling if you can bring that in to the story.
By not screaming, because he's passed that discipline check, he's winning.
Yeah. And you could represent that for every successful check that you sort of have as a bit of a milestone for, as you progress. That's great storytelling. Very good. Our final question. Huzz.
Yeah. It comes from Kyle Quigley. He asks... on our Dice Pool podcast community group, does anyone have specific or iconic way they ask for initiative? I've been trying to come up with something creative, but I'm coming up empty.
Now, there was a lot of talk on Facebook about some suggestions, and I know that I certainly put some forward. I think, Huzz, you put some up there as well.
I don't think I did.
Might have been Flano, but there were certainly some good suggestions out there for how to handle that. So as far as what they're basically, I guess, looking for, the conversation sort of went a bit away from this a little bit. But what the essence of it was is that if you've got somebody who's hiding in the shadows and a party goes into a room where this person is hiding, how do you represent asking for initiative or asking for perception checks?
Easy.
When you're going into that room without actually revealing that anybody's there. And that's kind of where the discussion went down the path of, and I think that's kind of where he's coming from.
Well, I know something that I've done recently in the past is disguising initiative checks as opposed to checks. And people don't realise it's an initiative check until they've rolled it.
Right.
I go, can you make me a perception check, please? And they go, okay. And they make a perception check opposed to perception. opposed to the stealth of whoever they're up against. And if the person beats them in the stealth check, guess what? They have initiative over the person. And that has set the initiative for the entire combat. And the players haven't even realised they're rolling initiative. And I did that for a Star Wars game I was running not too long ago for you guys, where you guys are walking through the woods and a bunch of super stealthy droids attacked you guys. I had everyone make stealth checks, and everyone failed pretty horribly except for maybe one person who spotted the droids, but everyone else couldn't react until after the droids had jumped out of the trees and done the thing. And it wasn't until after that had happened, everyone had realised, oh, we're in initiative now. And just like that, it was resolved. And it was great.
Chris?
Well, no, I agree with what's been said. Honestly, I typically don't run into this that often, mostly because at the time I call for initiative, they know there's a problem. I mean, the only time you'd have to call for initiative without the players knowing about it is kind of rare. And again, if you have a situation where someone's gotten the drop on them, they should be able to fire a shot or make an attack or do whatever they're going to do before initiative starts because they have the drop on them. At the point you have combat where initiative is happening, the players have already been attacked. They already know that somebody's got the drop on them. So I don't know. I guess it just, for me, hasn't come up that much.
It is definitely rare because most of the time if the initiative is involved, it's a no-brainer that stuff's about to happen. So it is more common than not, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably getting sort of, rather than going, everybody roll for initiative, that it's sort of, right, everybody puts their combat hat on. But are there any sort of unique ways that you can come up with to do that?
So this is an overall change to your GMing style. But, guys, cool and vigilance should not just be used for initiative. And if you have your players roll vigilance checks in place of perception checks for certain things, and you do that regularly, or you have them roll cool checks, regularly for other things, then if you ask your party, hey guys, give me cool checks, simple difficulty, maybe they won't know it's initiative.
True.
So we're also considering different ways of just asking, instead of literally just asking players to roll for initiative. So if you want something iconic, one thing that I like to do, I know that a lot of people use music as background when they're role playing. My preference isn't actually to just have music playing in the background generally, but it's to pick a piece of music that you use for certain types of encounters. Okay. So you might have a track that you play for the start of combat. So rather than actually asking for initiative, you just start playing that track. And after you've done that a number of times, your players will subconsciously cue in straight away to what that music means. And it's a trigger. You create a trigger for them.
Because there's some great programs out there that like Sirenscape, who the guys are from Australia. I met them a few years ago back at PAX Australia when for the first show. And they've developed that software now where it's amazing, where you can run it off your laptop or your iPad or your phone, and just as soon as something happens, you just press that button, and all of a sudden you're in combat sound mode. So there are definitely ways that you can do that. Whether it is you're just using Spotify or whatever else.
Well, there's a lot of people too in Genesis giving. As a system that you can apply to any setting that you want. A lot of people are recreating their favourite settings that have often been in TV shows and movies, and they come with their own soundtracks. And there are iconic moments through those things that you've experienced where if you can play a track off that and you know exactly what part of the movie it's from. So you're reconnecting people's memories to experiences they've already had, and you can use those things in parallel with the game that you're running in that same setting as your way of calling for initiative at different times, depending on different track used depending on what you're asking them to do.
It's because it establishes an urgency. Like I know when we were doing the Shadow playtest and we did the big fight scene in the apartment, and I chucked on that iconic Dread combat music, and immediately everyone knew what was going on. They knew this fight was going to be a brutal fight. It wasn't going to be standing around picking off some goons. These guys are going to be crack dudes crashing in through the windows and gunships flying outside the windows, and that's what happened. It was a brutal fight. I think everyone went down except for the net runner, which was Ian's character, who scurried away through for a ventilation shaft whilst everyone got gunned down by a big bad cyberpunk equivalent to Dread kicking in the door for shotgun.
Yeah.
And that music was playing and everyone was amped for it. And I think I asked for initiative in the traditional sense, but that music had painted the picture before.
It's already emotively brought people into the place that you want them to be before you get them to grab their dice.
Okay, a few years ago there was an indie RPG released. I know it's shocking I'm talking about an indie RPG. A few years ago there was an indie RPG released called Katanas and Trenchcoats.
Right.
And it was basically, it was very tongue-in-cheek and very intentionally humorous, but it was obviously making fun of the Highlander television show.
Right.
It was Ryan Macklin and Leonard Balsera spearheaded it, and they're two guys who did a lot of work for Fate. But part of the core thing is like you have different attributes and skills, and it's like how badass you look and stuff like that. But one of the key things is music is required for the game, and they actually they created a YouTube playlist for the game. And it's all these era-specific songs. But additionally, every PC has a song that is their song. And anytime combat starts, you play and you put the soundtrack on random. And if that PC song is playing at that moment, they get bonuses to their rolls.
That's amazing.
That's
that
cool.
Is great. Yeah.
That's cool. Because how many times have you run a game when you've got a soundtrack? I know it happens to me all the time, and for as long as I've been playing Star Wars, even back in D6 days, is that I'd always have a randomized track going. And all of a sudden, just at the right moment, the Imperial March comes on or whatever else. And
the music does a dramatic moment in the track, and it matches to the game perfectly. And and everyone notices it.
Yep, absolutely. So
no one's attention can be on the music at all. But that dramatic moment will key with the dramatic moment in the game, just by pure coincidence.
Yep.
And everyone's like,
yeah. Well, that's why why music's used all the time in movies and TV shows.
Funny that.
It's a hook to bring people emotively along with what they're watching.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a thing.
Good music.
Sorry,
I was just going to say, good music is its own character.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, indeed.
Absolutely. Because you look at the likes of, say, Jurassic Park. There was a YouTube thing somewhere, I think you can search for it, that it just has the soundtrack removed. And it is nowhere near as sort of suspenseful when you've just got the action on screen.
Yeah.
But in saying that, there is some films and moments in films that don't have a soundtrack, and the lack of soundtrack can make the scene even more riveting.
So,
It's only, but it only works through clever cinematography and good director. I think one of the Nolan Batman movies does it. There's an entire, I think it's the, I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole when the Dark Knight's chasing the Joker and he's got his truck, the semi-trailer. I'm pretty certain, I might be misremembering it, but I'm pretty certain that scene has no music through it.
Same as Alien.
Yeah.
Aliens.
The Last Jedi does it as well. So does, and I know Huzz will cringe as much as I do when I say this, but Episode 2 does it as well. In the asteroid chase between Obi-Wan and...
it has those awesome seismic charges.
Yeah, it has the seismic charges, but no soundtrack
It
at all.
actually does it twice. It does it through that scene and the initial scene when they're all tied up in the arena on Geonosis.
Oh, really?
And the monsters attacking them.
Yep.
There's no soundtrack in that moment.
Wow.
There was actually music made for that scene.
Yep.
But for whatever reason, it wasn't put into the final release.
Yeah.
And the music only cues once all the Jedi and everything show up and the fighting starts.
There you go.
Well, listen, you can cringe over the prequels all you want, but you can't cringe over the scores.
No,
because,
definitely not.
I mean, it's some of the most iconic Star Wars music ever, and. We're way off topic at this point, but I'm loving this conversation. Let's play a game. I want to explain to you why John Williams is the greatest composer in the last 100 years.
Right.
So, good scores is if you hear the score, you can instantly know what movie it's from, right?
Yes. Yep.
Amazing scores are where I can tell you the title of the movie and you start humming the score. Okay, so let's play a game, boys.
Yeah.
Superman.
Yep.
Okay, immediately. Dun, da, 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 in your head, automatically.
Yep.
Okay, Star Wars, no brainer, right? I can go through the list, but
Jurassic Park.
Yeah,
Jurassic Park. Okay, immediately. Okay, all those films we just mentioned.
Yep,
they're all John Williams.
Yeah.
John Williams, yeah. Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
Indiana Jones.
Yep.
Dances with Wolves.
Yep.
Okay. There's some I can just give you the title of the film in your head. The song starts playing, and 90% of the time it's John Williams. That's the power of the characterization that human being has brought to a score.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the likes of movie defenders, and I know that Scott has said this before, that he equates John Williams to the Amadeus of the modern age, and I would 100% agree with that.
No, he's a brilliant man. He knows what he's doing.
He has had such an impact on pop culture, on just our culture generally, that it's just amazing. But I mean, I look at it when it comes to his sort of soundtracks, and when I hear a certain point in some of the pieces that he's done, I picture the scene that it's in, and the dialogue just comes basically along with it as well. So,
for anyone at home that's listening and who hasn't listened to it, check out a podcast called Star Wars Oxygen. All it is there's many episodes by now, and all it is a really clever and talented music composer who goes through all the Star Wars soundtracks beat by beat and breaks them down and explains all these little nuances that you miss out on entirely when you're just listening to the music by yourself and watching the films. Because he's a very skilled composer himself, he breaks it down for the listener and tells them what's going on here and there, and it's really fascinating.
Wow. Yeah.
Like I listened to all the episodes of the podcast, but there's one episode that stands out in what he explains on the approach to Cloud City in Empire Strikes Back. I bet you most people don't realize there's actually an orchestra playing in the background for that track. It's very, very faint. If you listen to it, it sounds like wailing sirens leading the Millennium Falcon to safety, which isn't safety, of course. It's a trap. But when you listen to that watching the movie, you barely even notice the orchestra.
Because it's very flutes.
It blends with the flutes, but it's 100% there.
Wow.
And once you know to listen for it, you hear it every time. It's amazing.
Wow. Yeah. Very good. Well, that's certainly off topic, but
that happens.
It's all good.
It's the end of the show, so if you've gotten this far, then...
Well, there you go. That is true. But hopefully that answers your questions, guys. So thanks for sending those in. So that basically brings us to the end of another show. If you have any questions like these, as I mentioned before, you can send us an email to info@thedicepoolpodcast.com or post your questions to Facebook and Twitter. And if you're lucky, we may even read your questions on the show.
You can visit us on our website, www, all the W's, all the W's, thedicepoolpodcast.com. Just don't type that many W's. You might get somewhere weird. Or do it and tell us where you end up.
And you said post, but also be sure to like the Dice Pool Podcast on Facebook and Twitter by searching @Dice Pool Podcast.
And you can also find us on YouTube by searching @Dice Pool Podcast, on Discord via the D20 radio channel, and of course on iTunes and your favourite podcatcher. Also, if you are feeling generous, please take some time to give us a review on iTunes. It really helps us bump up the show, up the queue. And of course, if you love social media, you can also review us on Facebook as well.
Only good reviews. If you've got a bad one, keep it to yourself.
Actually, I don't think we have a bad review.
That's because no one's putting the bad ones up. Because I'm asking them nicely.
Very good. All right, so that brings us to the end of another show. Thank you very much to our co-hosts while Caitlin and Flano are away doing their thing. GM Mick and GM Chris, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome.
As always, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. All right, so I guess that's a wrap. So to all of our listeners, thank you so much for your patronage over the last 12 months and since we've been running on the show. We here at the Dice Ball Podcast hope that you and your families have a very happy and safe holiday season, and we look forward to seeing you all in 2009 with more great show topics.
2019.
That's 2019. Did I say 2018?
This is 2009.
Oh, well, really? Wow. We're going back.
Great Scott!
But anyway, we'll be back with some great show topics, news and reviews episodes, and of course some actual plays, which our next one will be Rush Hour, I believe it is, for Android.
Yes.
Which we'll be doing soon.
When am I gonna run for you guys?
Well, that is true. That is true. We need to organise that because we've said that back in the Magic episode.
Well, let's make a date and do it.
Let's make a date. Let's not do it on air.
Let's make a date.
Stop it.
No touching.
Inappropriate touching.
No touching.
Well, anyway, as I said, that's a wrap. I'm GM Hooly.
I'm GM Huzz.
I'm GM Mick.
And I'm GM Chris, wishing you peace, love, and good gaming.
And all together, we are the Dice Ball Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away. The Dice Ball Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dice Ball Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains the property of the Dice Ball Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The Genesis role-playing game, the Genesis logo, content, and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.